down to like 1 million characters.
Yeah, every other anime.
Every anime that I've watched. No, that's about it.
All right. And I'm ultimate despair of Gilgamesh, but people usually just call me Nick because I don't like saying that. I played Astro a lot in the past. Did some speedruns in Creator, a little bit in Delta as well, but kind of moved on to Scholar. And but I still have a huge interest in Astro and played a lot in PF a lot, like a stupidly unhealthy amount. And some people wonder how I do it, but I don't know. I think it's fun. So yeah.
And as a little bit of a warning for the next like couple minutes, my roommate across the way is a very loud and obnoxious fan of professional American football, and his team is currently tied moving into overtime, so there might be a scream or two, and I'll try and mute it in time, but no promises.
Go football, as they say.
Yeah.
All right. So we're gonna start our first segment with okay, some people are saying that Anya and Zerk are a little quiet, just letting you guys know.
Okay, we'll speak up a bit.
I can't really boost you anymore, Onion, but
yeah, that's fine.
Zerk could try it.
Let me just get my mixer here.
Ari, apparently you're loud and clear though. I think I'm pretty loud. All right.
Is this better? Hopefully, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
Sounds better.
No, that's a little clearer, yeah.
Alrighty, let's move on to our first segment, I guess. So this one is just like standard card analysis stuff. So this somewhat new website, XIB Analysis, has this really useful feature in the Astro section where you can basically just analyze every single card decision an Astro made and just completely remove all the noise from like, what they did with healing, what they did with damage. It's purely just what did they do with cards, which has not really been done before, so it's really helpful for our cause.
And of course, we'll have the blog itself pulled up because there are some factors that you have to consider when you're deciding what cards you use, but it's really helpful to have a log like this because it's FF Logs is not the cleanest tool, as Zerk put it. It's very obtuse in how you get information. I mean, everything's there, but it's kind of a bungle to get through, and I'm sure most people wouldn't be able to see it. So this is a very clean and effective way to just see what's going on.
Mm-hmm. So the one we picked for right here is we're just gonna say they're anonymous. Their name might pop up in the logs, but we're just gonna pretend they're anonymous for our purposes. But it's basically like a very high damaging Astro who maybe had some questionable card decisions. And we're not here to flame or anything. We just want to keep in mind that even like people who have 99s or oranges or high purples on FF Logs still make even like the most rudimentary mistakes, and those mistakes aren't really reflected in their logs. So
kind of the big thing about Astrologian is you can be a fantastic healer and be amazing at giving yourself and your co-healer really good damage while making lots of card mistakes. And while a lot of the card mistakes in the long run don't equal to a lot, it kind of can equivocate the situation and make it kind of difficult to perceive exactly what their contribution could have been versus what they are.
All right. You guys have it open, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. All right. Did anyone look at the log? I wasn't sure if was there a card used pre-pull? Or...
I didn't look actually. Let's have a look.
I would guess there was.
Do not have the card. This is a Sigma log, right?
Yeah,
Yes,
I posted it in the Discord.
Yeah, in the Discord. Mm-hmm.
The first one.
I think we picked 05, 05 and 08S, just because they've got some nicely timed phases, and we're quite familiar with the timings on them. Whereas currently, with Frog and people having different levels of gear, that kind of biases your card decisions one way or the other. So I don't really think we thought Alphascape was appropriate to do this early in the tier.
Yeah, we're really familiar with the Sigma reasoning, but as he said, like if someone gets like a bunch of gear, the Astro might be more inclined to feed that person cards, even though it's not like true in the when all things are even thing.
Yeah, it's looking like balanced pre-pull is what was used here.
Okay, so
Which is, it's weird the way it's like, so on FF logs itself, it doesn't say there's anything till 10 seconds, but the Arcana doesn't show any sort of anything until the Spirit 38, which matches up. Let me check the other log, make sure I'm not looking at the wrong one.
Well, it makes sense.
do you see the sleeve draw and all that?
Yeah, I do see that.
I don't think it displays stuff that was pre-pull.
No, it
Yeah,
doesn't.
no, it definitely doesn't. It's just weird how it's not recognizing the card till 10 seconds in.
All right, so balance pre-pull. What do you guys think?
Well, I mean, the given situation is just don't use cards pre-pull, and there's never a reason to. It's never a good idea.
No. People have this conception that if they get their first dot under balance, that is somehow a more valuable GCD than the extra one you'd gain the other side, having used it post-pull.
For 99% of situations, the weakest GCD from every member in the party is going to be their first GCD of
Exactly,
the entire pool.
It'll be a combo starter, whereas some people might get a combo finisher under it if you do it post-pull.
Yeah.
So it's never really worth doing pre-pull, ever.
Zerk, you have something to add to that? Okay.
I'm sorry, I don't have my like soundbite ready. So you're just gonna have to imagine that I'm screeching.
Okay.
That seems fair.
Alrighty. All right. So I guess they had balance and nothing else. I guess we can assume.
Yeah, I'm
yes.
assuming they had a balance AoE prepped pre-pull, used it pre-pull, and then they pull, and then that looks like, it looks like based on the timing, it looks like Malefic first, the half second, and then
Yes.
Combust, and then Sleeve Draw. And
Yeah.
so I'm not sure why they didn't weave anything between the Malefic and the Combust, but I mean, whatever. That's not the topic pertinent at hand right now. The Sleeve Draw gets them a pretty mediocre draw.
Yeah, I'd say so.
They redraw the. Okay, so here's like one thing. They redraw that bull trying to get a balance, probably to replace later on. Don't get it. Something bad happened in football, and then they they just weave through the cards normally. It looks like just each weave finding something else, and there's a little bit of a break for other OGCDs probably, but I mean, I don't think there's anything wrong necessarily with what they did. This sleeve draw right here, they get something pretty mediocre. They already have a card out. No sense holding on to that Spire because that's not worth a 30-second wait time since there's already a bounce out.
Do you guys see if the lady was used on anyone? I don't know if it does that in the later logs. But...
I don't think it does, no.
I don't think it does, no. This is on a Phantom train, so there's no healing that needs to be done. I mean, even in a lower level, like the most they'll have to do is if someone oopsies and stands in a ghost light, and then they'll need a little bit of something. But even then, you'll probably have star for it or something.
Yeah.
So I don't
I
think.
suppose the first question to discuss based on this then is what you guys think about undrawing that spear, or not undrawing the spear, and spreading it at 38 like they did.
I think. So the big problem here is they don't draw until 50 seconds. That's the thing. Draw is definitely back up. They lose their draw cooldown. It goes on cooldown at 8 minutes 30 seconds into the fight, or somewhere around there, 14 seconds actually, because they take forever. So this is probably actually, I was wrong. Actually, this is where they made their mistake. Is that they sit on Spire for. It's clear that you get this Spire, you want nothing to do with it. you want to get rid of it as quickly as possible. They redraw, they get nothing, they dump Lady, and then they, for at least 2 weave cycles, they don't do anything with that spear, or not spear, spire, and then they dump the spire, and at that point, you're putting your draw cooldown way too far back.
Yeah.
If
So
you-
draws,
yeah.
draws can be pulled out at what 44 seconds there.
Yeah.
Okay, I guess maybe this person thought that, oh, I already have a card I can play. I don't need to look for more cards. I don't know. Just trying to understand.
So so ignoring the mistake of having draw out. So 38 seconds into the fight. Well, first thing, no time dilation, or if they did time dilate, then they're just replacing the balance time dilation straight up.
Yep.
And they're probably not actually losing a lot of balance up time in terms of what C-op does, because they balance pre-pulled, so it's actually about to run out in probably a couple seconds.
Yeah.
So that's, I guess, okay, even though don't balance pre-pull. But now the situation is everyone is at a weak point in their burst, except for they have Dragoon, right?
I think they did, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and so even I think on, if I remember correctly, on Train, Dragoon actually doesn't. They have like a little bit coming up. I think they get a life cycle. I think they delay life cycle until like a minute into the fight, because there's something you can do to do that. So I think that's basically everyone's at a weak point right now. And if you look at the log, yeah, there's no one's really doing
Yeah,
any.
that spear is doing not much.
Yeah, that spear's pretty weak. So, and there's 2 options that you can do when you have the situation. You can, spear is not balanced, so you don't, it's not super important that you hold it for the next burst, but I think in his mind, or her, I don't actually know the orientation of the person at hand. They use draw,
really
and they're scared of getting a balance, and then they have a spread spear and they have to sit on it. But the thing is that it's okay if you're going to wait until the 1 minute burst, you can hold on to that balance for that 30 seconds and then use it to cover the burst anyway, and then you still have that spear spread. We can probably talk a little bit about if you have a bard and when not to use a spear, and when not to override a balance with spear. But
They have a bard, I'm guessing, right?
yeah, I'm pretty sure they have a bard. Yeah, they have a bard.
Yeah, I guess the best case scenario is you, instead of doing nothing, you would draw like a balance, spread that, and then give the spear to the bard, maybe, because the spear is probably better single target.
It's slightly stronger, but a naked spear. We have the math. I mean, we can get into that right now or later if we want, but most of the time you won't want to be replacing that AoE balance with a spear for a 1 minute burst section. But I think the major difficulty with this spear in particular, outside of the fact that they're not covering a whole lot of anything, is you're dumping your expanded Royal Road, so you're guaranteed to not have AoE cards for 1 minute burst. Guaranteed. There's no way you can possibly draw twice before the 1 minute 10 section burst at this point. And I think that's the biggest problem, because now you are losing. I mean, the spear is whatever, but losing that expanded Royal Road is going to make your ability to contribute to the 1 minute burst significantly weaker. And if you do end up in that situation, then now you have to hold your cards beyond a single draw sequence until the 2 minute burst section, in which case you might end up flooding through and overflowing cards, and your contribution is going to go down.
Yeah, and of course they use that spear at 38. They draw at 50, so ignoring the fact that they've missed a draw. If they draw into balance at 50 seconds, their spread slot is on cooldown for another 18 seconds there, which potentially puts them in a kind of interesting situation of what they then do with that balance, where they can draw it, or indeed any other DPS card, I suppose.
Yeah. So basically, three mistakes of holding onto the spire too long, playing that spear that isn't really doing anything, and then drawing late has set the person up in a situation where even best case scenario, that draw becomes a balance.
Yep.
They're not spraying that till 68 seconds in the fight, which is when everyone is getting ready to start giving a little bit of a minor burst again. That's a trick's about to come up. Or even if you don't even have a ninja. Do they have a ninja?
Yes, they do.
They do have a ninja, yeah. So especially since they have a ninja, everyone's burst is about to start hitting again. So now you are stuck with one card. You have flipped through 2, at right when I'm so sorry, guys. Right when your burst is about to come up again, and so now you're really not doing anything for the party until 2 minutes at that point.
Yeah.
Whereas if you react onto those 3 mistakes ASAP, properly, if you do it properly, where get rid of Spire immediately, hold on to that spear, and then draw immediately, then now the person will have spear expanded, worst case scenario, and they get 2 draw cycles before the next burst section, which you are more likely than not to find a balance in that section, because you get a draw and a redraw and then another draw and a redraw. You know.
Okay, so just to like summarize that, so basically don't pre-pull. So if you get a spear in your spread that early, you should just get rid of it, right?
It depends. I think
Yeah,
in this situation, right? Like, say, what this boils down to is that after their sleeve, they are left with, even if they had resolved it immediately, they are left with expanded railroad and spear in spread. And
Right.
say they had resolved it correctly, their draw would be coming back up at about 40 seconds.
yes.
So you draw at 40, and you draw and redraw. You are guaranteed to either get a damage card or an expanded railroad. And then if you hold that, if you were to wait and play a damage card at about 50 seconds, 50 to 60 seconds, you should comfortably cover the 1 minute burst. Since most of what's there is going to be coming up pretty much right in that 10-second trick window. You don't really need it to stretch that much longer. You could play it at shortly after 50 seconds. Unless you drew into a balance, you would not want to probably sit on that draw timer for 15 seconds and misalign things that way. But that is also situational.
But like in this situation, because he had time to draw again, he should have deleted it, right?
Well, that's what I'm saying. You don't have to actually get rid of it, essentially. You can wait until after your next draw before you decide what you're going to do with it.
Yeah.
Okay, I see.
It's fine, because you have 2 situations with your second draw cycle of this one draw sequence. So just for terminology clarification, when I say a draw sequence, that means the time between one sleeve draw and another, so 2 minutes, 4 draws, 3 to 4 draws ish. And then a draw cycle is when you hit draw, and then what you do with that one draw card. So in the first draw cycle after the draw sequence, after the sleeve draw, you have 2 things. You either get a balance or you don't. You get a balance, you can sit on that until the 1 minute burst, and you will be able to cover that 1 minute burst with that balance. You don't get it, then you will try and you'll draw, you'll redraw, you don't get it, you arcana that, and then you'll have your lord or whatever ready for the next burst. And the reason you'd want to arcana that instead of regardless of that, so you have your spear in the health slot. Now what you can do is you can either play that spear, delete the spear, or hold on to the spear until the 1 minute section. So you get to the 1 minute section, and you will be able to have another draw before that happens. And even if you don't, you will still have the spear ready to play for that 1 minute section. And that's a minor burst. And the reason a spear is okay to hold on to is because not finding a balance for that is 100% all right. You don't need a balance for that. You want some sort of DPS card in general. And going through true draw cycles before that will give you enough time to set yourself up for the 2 minute burst, which is decidedly stronger, and also give you enough time to try and find a balance for it. So I think holding onto the spear is the right move. If you just delete it out of your section, the only thing you're doing is just freeing yourself up for a balance, which if you don't find it, and you're screwed at the 1 minute section. And if you do find it, you can play it, or you'll be able to spread it and prep for the 2 minute section, depending on when you get to play the spear.
Okay, so basically, you have a damage card, but you're like, okay, this isn't the best damage card, but it's like playable, right? So you're just gonna keep it until you find something better, and you're like, okay, I'm trying to look for something better, but worst case scenario, you got spear at the burst, so it's right. Basically, the best you
Yes,
could do.
but also the fact
Yeah.
that it's only the 1-minute burst, like as Ari said, the 2-minute burst is considerably stronger. You've got sufficient draw cycles before that 2-minute burst, so you can safely hold on to that spear.
Mhm. Holding on to the
Yeah.
spear is, I think, the right move. Yeah, go
I
ahead,
would
Zerk.
as well there, yeah.
All right.
Go ahead, Zerk. You wanted to say something, it seems.
Oh, I was saying for the most part, the good rule of thumb for astrologian is that if you have something, the one in the hand is worth two in the bush, and it's very, very true for astrologian. Like
Hmm.
if the math just works out that way. If you have something already that is guaranteed value, it's rarely mathematically in your favor to gamble it away for a chance at something that is slightly better.
About the only time I'll ever undraw spread if there is a non-balanced DPS card in there. If there's like a spear and arrow, about the only time I will undraw spread that is if I am if I am in a downtime of longer than 30 seconds before a major burst section. Because if I draw a card and it's a balance and I can't spread that and it's coming up on the second pop burst, or even honestly a 2-minute burst is strong enough to make this relevant. You'll want to not be in a situation where you have to play that during the downtime and waste like 10 seconds of it, or get rid of it entirely and go for your next draw sequence. It basically means that that draw cycle was completely wasted.
All right. So this 1-minute section was. Would you say it was
Nothing
pretty
happened.
Would you say it's a pretty complicated situation, or it's pretty like?
I would say your 1-minute section, to make things as unmuddled and clear as possible and make it so you don't have to focus on a lot, is that this is a weak burst and you want to not expend everything to try and get an AoE balance here, but you do want to have something.
Have you guys already pointed out that this 126 is pretty late?
We
Yeah.
haven't got that far, but
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
they get very lucky later on in the log actually
Mhm.
to have something for that 2 minutes because they waste their AoE expanded at 126 with only draw and sleeve to find an AoE balance for the 2 minutes, and their sleeve comes through for them actually, as you can see if you scroll down. But they get very lucky there.
Yeah, that's kind of like an example of like you can't use results to validate the decision, I guess.
Yeah, exactly.
In this case, like he could have just gotten nothing basically, and he would have had nothing for 2 minutes, which is a much more powerful burst than the ones.
Yeah. He did have a strong. He had AoE balance for this strong burst here. So
Yes.
this is like the first major section where people are going to be doing damage outside of the opener is your 2-minute section. It's all on sleeve draw luck.
Yes, it's completely fluked that.
Yeah, it's glued to sleeve draw, and if you'll find more often than not, you will find a sort of DPS scenario that you can utilize during the 2 minutes section if your sleeve draws up. But the problem is that what will separate probably the better astrologians from just the good ones is that they will get cards ready for this section more often than others because of the fact that they are setting themselves up for success for this sleeve draw. I mean, I'll often have a AoE card ready of some kind before I even hit sleeve draw.
Yeah.
So I can play it, sleeve draw, and then I'll be setting myself up for the future. Or I'll have, this person, they were able to find an Ewer on their draw beforehand. Finding a draw or a spire is somewhat likely, but not entirely likely before you hit that sleeve draw. So I can't really hold that much against them, but this really just comes down to the sleeve draw, finding them a balance, and that's how everything worked out.
And just to make it clear for maybe newer astrologians, so they drew and then immediately royal roaded because they had an AoE royal road being the viewer, and that's like what you're supposed to do, right?
Yeah, that's a good move there.
What the player in particular did here, if you take out the context of everything else, 125 draw, spear, played it, that was bad, but they drew, and then they're getting ready to draw again. They draw on time, they wrote it right away, and then they sleeve right before the burst. So this everything minus playing that spear in particular from 125 till 203 is, or 205 I should say, is okay. That's all
Yeah.
good.
No, I think it's very good actually that they draw completely on cooldown, excepting 1 or 2 weaves. They resolve that draw straight away, and then they sleeve immediately afterwards. No, that's an example of good play at the 2-minute window. I'm not really sure what else they could have done there.
Okay, so it's kind of like the high roll mentality in a way. It's like, oh well, I had technically, if they did it your way, they would only have maybe 1 burst, right? But here they have kind of like, well, when I say burst, I mean like 1 AOE section, but like here they have 2 AOE sections. But that's just like
They
high
get
roll,
the-
right?
Yeah, it's high roll. Normally what you'd want to do with that spear that they found is you'd want to redraw that spear, hope for a balance. If you
Yeah.
don't get balance, then you arcana that, and
Yeah.
then you want to use that in your nearest possible weave, because AoE spear at the 90-second mark is not contributing a lot more raid DPS than a lord. It is contributing more, like, don't get me wrong, but it's not contributing so significantly more that not rolling for a balance. If they found a balance there, then they would have balance ready, can play it at 1 minute 55 or whatever. That will be up for the entire 2-minute burst section because cards are 30 seconds long. They can draw your sleeve draw. Now they have an AoE balance ready, already prepped and set, and they can get 2 extra lords out. So they get the difference. It's a 2 lord swing, because I could have gotten 3. I mean, I'm gambling that they get 1 over a lady, but it's a 2 lord swing effectively, or I should say 2 arcana swing, and they get 2 AoE balances set up already, and then they're already prepped and set for the 3-minute burst section, which is even compared to the 2-minute burst section for their comp. I'm pretty sure 2 minutes is slightly stronger. I mean, also this is trained, so your padding adds at 3 minutes, but I mean, in general, this comp will hit a little harder at 90 seconds. Not 90 seconds, at like moving into the 2-minute section and the 2:30 section than they will at 3.
I wanted to ask Zerk. Zerk, are you still there, or did you mute yourself?
Yes, just hacking up along.
Okay. Just something Ari said. I don't know if you agree, because I think you said something in the balance a few days ago. So he said for his spear at like 125, Ari thinks he should have redrew it. Do you think he should have redrew it?
I think that's definitely there are several very well defensible possibilities that I can see for that 130 draw. Like Ari just explained, you can gamble that for a balance to have that set up. Gamble that for a balance if you get one. Cool, spread it. You have that for the 2-minute mark, and then you get to sleeve into, you get to sleeve from a very favorable position. And it has very high potential. And the consolation is maybe you redraw into like a potential lord, or maybe you redraw into an arrow or something, and you could decide to play it. I think that actually playing that card there is not all that bad, depending on the timing of the fight.
I'm going to add on to that and give this person a little bit more of the benefit of the doubt, because I don't think this is what the DPS are supposed to be doing, but I do see that the Dragoon is entering a life cycle at 90 seconds, and the Red Mage is doing a melee combo there. So that is actually going to be stronger than their 1-minute section. So maybe they knew that their DPS were going to be adjusting their cooldowns in a way so that the 130 to 2-minute section is stronger.
Mm-hmm.
And if they knew that, then you can void everything I just said, and the 130 is stronger than the 1 minute. It's even stronger than the 2-minute section, actually, if they're going to be using those sorts of cooldowns there.
You say embolden? Or
No,
No,
we're
no,
going
no,
to
no.
melee.
Oh, the melee combo.
He's running the melee, which is Red Mage Burst. That's where their damage will come from. Is where they melee and where they don't.
And that happens at about 90 seconds, you think?
And yeah, at
Or-
90 seconds, I'm just looking at the log, and I do see that
Oh, okay.
Enchanted West Shao and Verholy come out at 150. So they're getting ready to go into it at 130, and then they go into it actually at like 145. So that card covers that, and then the Dragoon is in life cycle there, like guaranteed. So maybe that has something to do with the ad section and wanting life cycle up for that as well. Maybe, I'm not sure, but
I have a Bard as well, so I suppose that's Raging and Barrage.
yeah, Barrage does come up at 80 seconds, so that is a little bit of a burst for the Bard as well. So
Okay, so it's an interesting little like window here, right?
yeah, that might be a train specific situation. I'm gonna look at what they do in Kefka.
What are you gonna say? Is there?
I think in Train, specifically, the downtime with the ads is shortly after the 2-minute burst as well. So like playing a card at 2 minutes.
2:47, yeah.
Oh, is it that long?
Yeah,
2:47.
you do get full use of the card at 2-minute section. I'm gonna cross-reference something real quickly though, but keep talking.
Yeah, I remember that freaking ad timing because I'm like, okay, I gotta put my Shadow Flare 3 times, and
Yeah,
then
I
there's
always
the
got
ad.
super paranoid about my chain strat timing.
Yeah.
But yeah, it.
So that's
well,
actually
the interesting thing.
yeah.
Is that at 130, if you do just go ahead and play that spear, especially if you have a comp that has decent burst at 90 seconds, then yeah, as long as your draw cooldown is aligned so that you are going to be able to draw immediately before a sleeve draw at 2 minutes and still get that sleeve draw resolved before the burst at 210, which is kind of a whole thing, is making sure that you don't drift your draw cooldown so much that that you are sitting at like 10 seconds left on draw or something when sleeve draw comes back up, and you need to press sleeve draw right now if you don't have an AoE card already out or ready to play right this second, because otherwise it's not actually going to be up when the burst starts.
Yeah, it'll come up
Which would
halfway
defeat the
through,
purpose.
and that's pointless.
So just make it clear, sleeve draw needs to be pressed like immediately when it's up, right?
Pretty much.
By and large, yeah.
Most of the time, that's also a
depends,
dependent thing.
Sometimes you hold your burst for 30 seconds, like Kefka, Clown Kefka. The second burst is not right at 2 minutes, I think, in most groups anyway. Pretty awkward time to burst.
It's pretty astounding, actually. I think that they used sleeve the time they did, because it's literally like 0.2 drift, like from the first sleeve.
Their sleeve section is they're completely fine with where they use sleeve. Yeah, I just went back and checked things while I'm remembering it. That is as I thought. That's not the right way to. I say quote unquote right way. Most of the better run, actually every single better run I see, the 2-minute section should be stronger than the 90-second section.
Yes.
But this team in particular did burst harder there, and I don't think that was due to the card, because Spear is not going to contribute the extra like 7-8k rate DPS they had at 90 over the 2-minute section. So maybe the Astrologian knew that their comp was just going to set up to burst at that point instead of later.
Yeah, I have some sympathy for the Ast there. If they know the
Mhm.
DPS are bursting at 90 regardless of when they should be bursting, then spreading a card to cover that is not the worst idea.
I think even all other things being equal, even if the 2-minute bursts were stronger, just mathematically speaking, I don't think your odds are that unfavorable for emptying your gauge at 90 seconds if you're going to have a draw into a sleeve draw at 2 minutes. Because your odds for if you have an empty gauge on your 2-minute draw, you are either like 100% either going to get a damage card or expanded railroad. Because the only situation where you don't get one of those on the initial draw is if you draw bowl,
Yes.
which you would redraw, and you can't redraw into another bowl, so you've redrawn into one of the other two things. So you put that in your gauge, and then you hit sleeve draw, and if you say you drew a damage card, you put it in spread, you hit sleeve draw, you got a 1 in 3 chance to have that AoE Royal Road from the sleeve draw, and on top of a 1 in 3 chance to have Ewer or Spire in your hand, which you could then Royal Road and play from your spread, that damage card.
Yeah, so we may be like changing our decision on the spear then after getting.
I mean, it's still
More
a
info.
gamble.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm not changing.
It's also dependent on a lot of factors.
Yeah, I'm changing my decision on whether or not you play the card there. I'm not changing my decision on whether or not you redraw that spear.
Yes.
That I would still say 90 seconds is a minor burst, especially because it's not decidedly that strong right now. It's something you'd want to like. Arrow or Balance would have been a stronger card to have found, and that's a 2/5 chance of rolling into that, a 3/5 chance of rolling into something, not really that great. But the 2-minute section is still going to be pretty strong. So I still think that this spear, even in the situation, you want to redraw that spear. And that's, of course, the big asterisk to all this is a fight specific thing. If you harken back and remember 05S Phantom Train, with the way the ad timing showed up, this comp in particular did a rare thing and bursted harder at 90 seconds than at 120. That is not common. That is not what's supposed to happen most of the time. So pretty much every single time that you find this spear, you want to redraw it.
all right. So do we have anything to say about the 2 minutes, or is it kind of just like, oh, you got Balance? So.
The 2 minutes. The 2 minutes is pretty perfect, really.
Yeah.
They
They draw. They resolve it on their next weave. They sleeve on their next weave after that. They play their Balance on the weave after that. It covers the burst. They play it before the burst starts, which is what they should do.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's pretty perfect, really.
Yeah, and then they wrote the card. The road does come a couple sections late. I'm not a couple weaves late. I'm not looking at the log itself, but I'm
Yes.
going to assume there were other more pertinent things to weave at the point in time. I do vaguely recall some sort of damage spike happening at 2 minutes. It's not quite head on, but there was something that happened there.
That the healers have to run away for the praise, maybe?
Not yet.
Yeah.
That's at 220, I think.
Yeah.
But they could very feasibly just have let it drift slightly because they were using Lucid or Celestial Opposition.
Yeah. There's
back
a
up.
lot of. There's definitely other more pertinent things that could have ended up happening. So yeah, that's fine. This whole sleeve section is played well.
And that's especially fine because the ads are starting at 247 anyway, so letting that drift slightly is not going to impact anything.
Yeah.
You do not need another card before, what, 3 minutes 30? Something like that?
Sorry?
Wait, you don't actually need another card after 2 minutes until, what, 3:30? Unless you're going to use a card on the ad, which
I don't know. Is it
You-
worth
you
using the
get-
cards on the ads?
I do remember this. You get 2 draw cycles if you play a card right as the ads spawn. You have
do,
enough time
yeah.
for 2 draw cycles before the boss is targetable again. So carding the ads is fine. Ad sequences are hard. I don't know if groups were able to optimize them enough, but you usually want to optimize just enough damage that you're not expending so many cooldowns you're losing boss damage and reducing your kill time in order to get more damage on ads. But you do need to expend some stuff to get rid of them. So I don't know if people were speedrunning this fight enough to know exactly the specifics, because it is feasible that a card would just be mostly overkill and just number padding without actually contributing a lot. But I would say tentatively that a card on the ads is perfectly fine.
In a speedrun, you would save 2 minutes, right? For when you come back, because I think usually you only get like 1 more usage after that, right? So you want to use it for your pot, or did you guys use it right when it came back?
If you are speeding fast enough, you will kill the boss too quickly to get full use out of your third section of 2-minute cooldowns, so you hold those for your second pop. But
Yeah.
this group did not have that
No,
applied.
these
The
guys
six,
these guys reopened at 4:20 roughly.
yeah, the 620 kill times does give them enough time to 2-minute cooldown on the reopen and then have them come back up.
And someone makes a point that like the ads don't really last very long. So
No, they don't. The better kill groups were killing the ad. Of course, you need to have a measure of exactly what you're looking through, because the better groups that are killing the ads so fast that a card on them doesn't do a lot and is a pretty low weak card is not going to be the case for most groups. Most groups are going to see the ads for 8-9 GCDs, and that's enough to make the card worth it.
yeah, it's just like in this case, it's like you use the balance, but in reality, your balance is really like a 10-second balance, like a 30-second balance.
Yeah.
Although if you're very lucky, you'll get 10 seconds worth on the chimney as well. So
Are you guys are you guys for this 255 usage or against it, or is it like plausible?
I don't really care about it. Yeah. They've got, as Ari said, they've got enough draw cycles to reasonably get back into something worth having. They've got sleeve coming up as well before they'll reopen on the boss. So I don't know. I think it's fine to card the ads in this case.
Yeah, I think it's fine.
All right, you agree too, Zerk?
Yeah, I think it's fine. I really didn't. It doesn't look like they lost anything, really.
Okay. Like they draw pretty much on time after that. Looking at
The interesting
327.
thing is that redraw on the arrow at 358.
I'm not sure about that.
It's. I mean, they do have sleeve up right there, so I understand. I'm just not sure. It's a fuzzy situation to me.
The redraw on the arrow, under the assumption they are using their 2-minute cooldowns at 4 minutes.
Yes.
So the redraw on the arrow is fine. I think spreading the arrow. There are two levels of high rolling with Astrologian. There's rolling so high that you are literally only going for balance ever at burst sequences and wiping if you don't. And then there is rolling high in the sense of like, this is an okay gamble that I really can't look down upon. And there is some math you can probably do to figure out exactly what the value of redrawing that arrow is, and is it a good idea. But if you do have sleeve up and they are using major cooldowns at 4 minutes, a draw, a redraw, and then a sleeve draw will get you enough chances that I think you are about 50-50 on getting a balance for that, and you are very likely to end up with some sort of DPS card.
Let's assume we're just going for like average case. Yeah.
Average case. I think you redrawing that arrow is, I'm not going to say questionable. I'm going to say it is reasonable to do to spread it and then hope you get a balance out of sleeve, because you do get redraw. You do get to redraw the cards you get out of sleeve. So if you basically what is happening, if you pocket that arrow, put it into your spread, you are reducing your chances at getting a balance by one card. You are not, because in here, draw, redraw, and then sleeve, get 2 other cards. So that's total 4 cards and the probability that goes with those. Whereas if you draw, spread the arrow, and then sleeve, you have the arrow spread, and then you get the card out of sleeve, and then you can redraw that card. So I think it is a better idea for average case to spread that arrow, but it is, I can't really condemn redrawing it necessarily because it is 4-minute cooldown.
Yeah, I think arrow is not a bad card for that 4-minute burst.
So you think you should have kept it?
Well, maths aside, I personally am looking at that, and I would have kept that arrow. I think, have played it, and then done a naked sleeve draw with nothing, which is perhaps I don't know. I don't know what other people think about that. It's maybe questionable. But if nothing else, they've got an arrow covering 4 minutes, and then they're getting the maximum value of their sleeve draw that they can, in the sense that they're getting a roll effect, they're getting a card in their spread, and they're getting a card drawn. And they've got their redraw still because they haven't redrawn the arrow. So I quite like that as an option.
Okay, so
It's
US.
definitely a situation I'd like to try to quantify in the sheet at some point.
Yeah.
It gets very convoluted.
Okay, so Ari thinks it's fine. Onion, you would have kept it, right? And Zerk's
Oh,
like,
I think it's fine, but I personally would have played that arrow. Have had nothing at all going into the sleeve draw, so that way I get the maximum possible things out of my sleeve draw that I can. Admittedly, not maybe in the places where I want them, but I don't know. I feel that's an acceptable alternative.
Yeah, I think, redrawing that is not that bad, because worst case scenario, you get exactly what happened here. He redrew into something that they
Yeah,
couldn't
it's
use.
useless.
So, just dump it and.
well, that
hit sleeve
happens.
draw.
That happens
your
4
odds of getting
out of 5 at a time, right? There's literally only one card that's
Yeah.
better than Arrow. So 4 out of 5 at a time, you just get a minor arcana. Like,
Pretty
Great.
much. But at the same time, the worst case scenario here is you get nothing useful and you just hit sleeve draw with an expanded Royal Road. Your odds of getting a damage card
Ari,
from
your
that sleeve
keyboard.
Oh, I didn't mute in time. Sorry. Keep going.
your odds of getting a damage combo from that sleeve draw when you already have that expanded Royal Road prepped is really good.
Yes, it is.
So the worst case scenario here, you're not going to you're not going to have less than a single arrow, basically. You're not going to do worse. But I think that the better options are, like Ari said, to pop it in spread, hit sleeve draw. You still have redraw available now. So you have I believe, let me just check to double check my number here.
You
20%, I believe.
you looking at the
Between
sheet?
draw and redraw. Yeah.
Hmm.
I believe it is 20% chance just naked draw redraw to get a balance.
You guys in
you
chat
have-
care? There's the spreadsheet thing if you want to look at it. Zerk made.
And for the purposes of a 4-minute burst, I would say that arrow and spear are quite close.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
And
when
so
do
those
you
two,
make that
And
decision?
important
totally
to
fine.
look at the comp as well. You have a full crit comp, which will make the actual value of spear go down in terms of how much crit you are getting naturally. Ignoring, because there's no crit damage attached to chain litany. I mean, they're not litanying here, I don't think. Maybe they are. I hope they aren't. But
No, they are actually. Yeah.
oh, they are using litany here.
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, that will. So litany, bard, being bard and existing, and chain will lower the value of spear, but having a bard in the party itself will raise the value of that spear quite a bit.
We just talked about this the other day.
Yeah, I remember this
actually,
combo.
specifically.
Yeah.
The whole crit buff, like diminished returns for not multiplying crit damage, but essentially, the comparison that people use to say that in the dark times when the crit stat only scaled crit chance and not crit damage, it had diminishing returns because if you have, for the sake of clarity, if you have 80% crit and you add 10% more crit, you're not getting a whole lot out of that. Like if your crit multiplier is 50%, you have 80% crit, then your effective damage multiplier is 140% of your base. And then adding another 10%, you're getting 5% on top of your current 140%, which is much less impressive than adding 5% onto the base 100% through, say, an equal amount of determination, and then multiplying that 105% by the 140% from your 80% crit chance. Like the value is relative because you're gaining a flat amount of damage, which is a smaller portion of all of your damage, because it's a 10% crit onto 100 or onto 80% crit is much less significant than 10% crit onto none. But the way you can look at buffs is you're not actually comparing them to an exclusive alternative. So that's kind of, I don't know, I feel like I explain it poorly every time, even though I've explained it many times.
The main okay, forgive me. The main draw of using crit buffs stacked on top of each other is not for the crit buff stacked on top of each other, it's for the other buffs in play at the same time, which will increase the value of those crit buffs themselves. So getting, even if, you stack all these crit chances on top of each other, the reason you don't spread those out over the course and, stack them on top of each other one after another so that you're getting the most quote unquote gain from the extra crits provided is that the other buffs that come into play, trick attack, battle voice, foe wreck, embolden, dragon sight, etc., all these other buffs that are getting put up, they all make it so that even if you're getting less quote unquote crit benefit from those the extra critical chance, the other buffs make it more worth and increase the value of that buff compared to being played naked when nothing else is going on. So, come full circle, that spear, a spear is, even if, in a full crit comp, spear is, lowered value in terms of how many crits you get, but increased value because of all the other things that are being used. And so a critical strike, one extra critical strike with all these other buffs up is worth more than, two without them up. That's a general number that's not, mathematically backed up, but that kind of idea.
I think, yeah, in practice, even if stacking crit buffs had diminished returns for the sake of the crit buff itself, it wouldn't make any difference. It wouldn't make any difference in how you actually play it, just because it would still be worth it because all of your potency and all of your other multiplicative buffs are concentrated in that area, and that would far outweigh any minor scaling weirdness.
Yes.
But the common misconception that that stacking multiple crit buffs on top of each other is inherently less mathematically effective than spreading them out is just kind of a conflation with how the crit stat used to work.
Versus how it works now. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Now it's like, you could have.
I feel like we need a pin.
Things come full circle. Spear versus
Yeah.
arrow, how they are in strength compared to each other. In a comp like this, they're about the same. Probably the arrow is slightly stronger in this scenario, but they have similar values because the more buffs that get stacked on top of each other, the more value each of them get, and they kind of close into each other. So spear versus arrow kind of, they have similar values. So what do we do with this in particular, this 4-minute burst section? How do we analyze it? What's going on here?
Well, I'm guessing you don't undraw.
Yeah, definitely don't undraw, but you have this. Definitely don't undraw. Draw into arrow. What do we do with this arrow? So I said, depending on your point of view on what you're going for, if it was me in an average weekly run, I would spread that arrow, and then I would sleeve before I play that arrow, and
Two
then see if
seconds.
I get a balance.
Okay, when you say spread that arrow, for other people, do you mean place it into your spread?
Yes,
Do you
okay.
spread it into-
The English usage of these card
Yes.
jargon is complete and utter trash. But
Yeah.
so
I
you
can't
have,
believe they called it spread. Like,
yeah. So
Yeah, because
you have your card spread, which is the card that. So when you use spread, you put a card into your held slot, and then the card that you currently have drawn is your card held. And then when you play a card, you're playing a card. So I am putting, for the sake of clarity, when I say spread, I get my arrow. What I am going to do with that arrow is I'm going to pocket it. And then before I play that arrow, well, Onion was saying I would play that arrow and then sleeve for the most value out of that sleeve. On an average weekly run, I personally would sleeve first and then redraw, try and find balance. Because this is Phantom Train in the 4-minute section and they are bursting. If they are not bursting here, if they're in a speedrun scenario where they are holding for their second pot, then I would play arrow and then sleeve after.
Yeah, that's reasonable, I think.
I think they're both. One of them gives you a better concentrated average value at this 4-minute mark, and the other one has better potential to leave you with more cards set up going into the next couple of draws.
Yeah,
Yeah.
precisely.
Which, agreed, actually, is dependent on exactly what they're using at this 4-minute mark.
Yeah, personally, I think naked sleeves are terrifying, and I refuse to do it.
Naked sleeves offer a lot of difficulties and problems.
Yeah,
I
naked
hate them so
sleeves
much.
are interesting and a whole separate discussion, I think.
Yes, please put a spire in my spread.
Yeah. The and what's kind of sad is that the entire difficulty of a naked sleeve would go way down in scare if spread was a 25-second cooldown instead of a 30-second cooldown, but that's for a different time and a different discussion.
It's the same.
Or for that matter, if you could still extend a card buff in your hand like you used to be able to with Celestial.
Yeah, what Celestial used to do, and extending the duration of a card in your hand would have made it a little bit more interesting. But yeah, anyway. So.
Do you think spread, the skill itself, should have that high of a cooldown? Like, because it's just so inconvenient, you know. You like.
It would be nicer if it were the same as Minor Arcana cooldown, but that would solve a lot. That would solve a lot of problems.
I think, on a theoretical level, I think in the current situation we have now, it would be better for spread to be on a like a 1-second cooldown, basically.
Yeah, exactly.
But in the future, if they want to add more things into the ass kit, you never know what kind of balancing difficulties and whatnot will come up, and how you can keep some sort of skill expression with that 25-second or 30-second what it is now.
I think.
All right, it was kind of like out of the scope a little bit, I guess. But
yeah.
Sorry, you can finish what you were gonna say, Zerg.
No, I just think all of the card manipulation skills, honestly. Redraw, obviously, you should only be able to use. I think the 30-second cooldown is very appropriate.
Yeah.
But like Royal Road, why does Royal Road have a 15-second cooldown? Like, just why? Honestly, why?
It like never really comes into play, I feel like.
It happens.
But when it does, you really notice it.
Mostly when you draw, empty gauge, draw, Ewer, Royal Road it. Now you hit sleeve draw, you get a balance and spread, you play it, you have a Ewer in hand, you want to Royal Road it, okay, sit on your hands for 15 seconds. Or dump it, one of the two, you know?
Yeah, and it's sort of like what I was getting at is like, before in Heaven's Word, redraw being on a 30-second cooldown meant nothing. Like it literally had no influence on anything in the game at all. But now that we have sleeve, there is a scenario where you can have a card drawn and not be able to redraw it. Or you'd have to wait a long time to be able to redraw it.
Yeah, that's the really weird thing. It feels like sleeve just kind of got added, and then they didn't like adjust anything to.
I think it makes the job a lot more complex that it is that way, but I'm not convinced that it's necessarily in a healthy way.
Yeah, I don't necessarily think it is either. It's just from a game balance standpoint. they can add the cooldown being there in the current state is kind of trash. What they can do with it in the future. Now, this is also assuming they wouldn't just, put it to a low cooldown now, and then in the future, when they add stuff where having a higher cooldown would be nicer in some ways, they could just do that. But this is Square we're talking about here, and they adjust the game like 3 times an expansion. So,
Yeah.
All right, let's get back to this.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can't deviate it, haven't we?
yeah. So 4 minutes.
Okay,
Sleeve.
Balance at 420, guys. Balance at 420. Your opinion?
Yep. Well, they burst at 420, so that.
This is their reopener burst.
Yeah, this
It
is
is
slightly strange, but yeah.
Yeah, taking away their ad phase burst, which if you want to call that a burst, since there's just so many targets, you're going to be doing a lot of damage. This is the tied for the second strongest burst they'll have in this fight, tied with the 5-minute 30 burst with their second pots, because they will have everything up on the second pots, but they won't have the 2 minutes for it. So it's sort of like they get 60s and pots at 5:30, and they get 60s and 120s, and I think they save the 180s here as well. So they get
They do, yeah.
So they get
Yeah, like
everything in their 6-minute burst, quote unquote, here, but they don't get their pots, and then they get everything but their 2 and their 3 minutes, and they get their 1 minute and their pots at 5:30.
The problem with this 422 balance is that, well, their burst is 425. There's no reason they couldn't have played that balance 10 seconds earlier.
Mm-hmm.
Because when they draw now at 438, their spread slot is on cooldown for another 14 seconds. If they get a balance there, they just have to sit on that for 14 seconds. So that's not ideal. There's no reason not to play that balance at 412 rather than 422.
Yeah, they
Not least of
also.
which actually, because Litany is 419. So
Mhm.
What are you gonna say, Zerk?
They also, I mean, sort of a glaring thing that I don't think we've actually mentioned, though, is that they actually used undraw at 406, which
Oh
is
yeah, I mentioned that.
wrong for many reasons.
yeah,
Do we want to talk about that? I mean, I guess it was kind of obvious to us, but maybe
Yeah.
not so obvious to other people.
Undraw
Yeah,
is a
it's
skill which has one very, 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 very niche use that has only ever come up in all my polls in the history of this game so far. I have only ever had to redraw once ever, and it was because of deaths, weird lucid timings because of said deaths, and a 1 minute and 40-second intermission thanks to Uwu. Is the only reason I ever had a purpose for undraw, was that one pull in particular, but most of the time this is not a skill you will be, especially in a fight with the Fire Train. This is a skill you might as well just not have on your hotbar.
Indeed, if they're
Mhm.
bursting at 420, there's no reason they can't burn that lady and Minor Arcana that bowl instead. There's zero reason to undraw that. That could potentially be a Lord, which they could use at 422.
Mhm.
And I'm fairly certain based on. No, they redrew already. Okay.
Yeah, they've redrawn already, so
Yeah.
they can't redraw that bowl.
Yeah, I can't redraw the bowl, but yeah,
Which
it's,
means they need to get rid of that lady and Minor Arcana it as soon as they can.
That, and of course, if you do ever, for any reason, actually just straight out dump undraw a card, at least don't use the actual skill.
Yeah.
Use the status off macro. They're pinned.
I'm not sure if
in
it differentiates.
death channels.
It does.
I'm sure it must.
Yeah, here you've definitely hit the undraw action.
Really? Oh wow. Yeah, don't ever use the end game ones, guys. They're bad.
I
yeah,
can't fathom why they exist in their current state, but
it's just because the gauges, they forced gauges on jobs, and it's created issues for a few, and been very good for another few. But for Astrologian, our gauge is basically a pretty representation of what we had for the history of ever, and it gave us these 3 useless skills that they had to physically put back onto our buff bar in order for us to be able to smartly utilize them again. But anyway, yeah. So undraw, don't use undraw. It's not a good move.
Okay, so let's see. They should have made This lady should have been gone a long time ago.
And then
See. So they draw like pretty good time rate, only 3-second drift, like one weave.
mhm.
You get
And
the
even
Uber.
in this theoretical scenario, just in case, because I just thought of this, in the theoretical scenario where this Lady of Crowns saves them the GCD, you still don't want to use that on draw because Lord is a stronger potency move than Malefic. And since you can weave it for free now, that there's no other, calculations involved in that. So either you redraw that bowl, get another lady, save your GC anyway, whatever, or you get a Malefic, have to use a Benefic 2 or whatever, 80 potency swing still in favor. So it's
There's zero reason.
Keep going.
Yeah.
So.
Bull is still 20%, right?
Yeah, so Bull is still incredibly overpowered for the scenarios we need it. And if they ever introduce a situation where you can play cards and not sacrifice, Royal Roads or potential at DPS or whatever, if they have a scenario where that Bull has no opportunity cost to playing it, they'll need to nerf it because Bull is insanely broken.
Yeah.
But
Here, give your tank Rampart for 30 seconds.
give your tank Shadow Wall for 45 seconds if you want to dilate it. It's not balanced in any way, but it's fine as is. But it's going to create balancing issues in the future if they want to.
Isn't it pretty similar? Isn't it pretty comparable to Crit Adlo though, in that way?
I think the difference is that Crit Adlo always has the opportunity cost of casting Adlo.
Whereas this bowl is just, it could be free, well, would be broken.
Yeah. The reason Bull is fine as it is because like Adlo, it has an opportunity cost on it right now. But if in the future they...
And of course also the fact that you rarely get a bowl when you would actually want to use it.
Mm-hmm.
You have to budget cooldowns assuming you're not getting a bowl. And because of that, the bowl is kind of useless.
Yeah, it's good for prog, good for recovery, incredibly strong for when you need it, but it's the opportunity cost for the way the game is set up does not give it a place in common scenarios.
Excellent for being passive aggressive in roulettes.
Yes, especially if you have the one and only Dr. Destruction in your party.
What is Dr. Destruction?
It's violent destruction. Don't worry about it.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know these memes. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's fine.
Yeah, he will jump off.
Let's see.
Right, so that 422 balance needs to be played earlier because there's no reason not to. But other than that, fine.
It's weird to see the Arcana empty after 4:30.
Yeah, it is kind of weird. And then I assume this is a combust, and that's how they get draw and Royal Road at the same time. This is sort of a good sign for me. I'd have to look to make sure they didn't lose. But if you're someone who can instinctively draw and then do something with that card immediately without losing uptime and do the right thing with it, and that's a good sign for being able to react.
Unfortunately not. It's a Malefic.
Never mind then. That was not a good move then. So, not a good move. Don't double weave. You can afford it.
They have 5.2 seconds between their GCDs though.
All right. Yeah. Okay. That's a different issue, but.
Man, all right. You always love giving people the benefit of the doubt, man. That's what I like about you.
I mean, I try to assume that people will do the right thing more often than not. So they draw
a lot.
Maybe his APM was so fast he double weaved in one weave window, dude. That's how fast he made the decision.
So some good ping right there. Mighty good ping. So draw Royal Road. That's all fine.
Okay, so we got. Hopefully, this is also combust. Draw, redraw immediately.
Hopefully, this is also combust.
512. No, that's Malefic as well.
Onion, please.
Okay. Well, looking just at cards themselves, ignoring weaving issues, there is some drift in the draw from before, and this is okay because in the priority of Final Fantasy 14 stuff, saving your own uptime in GCDs is the most important thing more often than not. And so if they had to weave an essential or weave a star placement there, that was crucial to keeping their GCD uptime and saving themselves. That's more important than hitting draw for that one section. So that's okay. But if they just kind of sat on their GCD with draw being off, then that's a difficulty. So just be wary of that.
Mm-hmm.
Then moving down, I guess we've got.
They
Yeah.
they redraw, they get the arrow, 515. They play the arrow.
Then what happens at 5?
Thank God they did not Arcana the arrow. But
All right, you're okay with this decision, right? Just like play it.
Mhm.
They
Okay.
celestial opposition that arrow
Mhm.
at 5:15.
That's
That
an
is
interesting
100%.
time to use Celestial.
It's okay. It's okay because it's an interesting time for Celestial. I can look into their COP timings after we're done with all this and be able to reevaluate stuff. But just looking at the cards themselves for right now, because sometimes what you can and cannot Celestial op does change what kind of thing you want to do with the card at hand. But
They cover the 535 trick attack with that.
yeah, okay, then that's a completely okay in the sense of like they play arrow at 515. That means the damage done from 545 to 555 is adjusted and you get damage there, which for their comp in particular, they actually are getting extra damage there compared to before. So that celestial opposition is a good thing.
Yeah, we're happy with that arrow. Draw into balance, they hold on to that balance, good.
Zerk, you have anything to say, or you also agree?
I'm contemplating because I'm just looking ahead at the next sleeve draw, and their next draw would have normally come up 2 seconds after they hit that sleeve draw. Just because I was looking at if they had drawn directly on time at 5:45. So the little awkward result of their draw drift there is that they had to press sleeve when they had less than 10 seconds left on draw, so they basically missed a card there.
Yeah, and the other thing is based on the kill time of this, their sleeve draw drift over the course of the fight that was okay at first, but started getting worse and worse. Like here, they actually sit on the sleeve for about 10-15 seconds.
Yeah, they get 3 seconds of balance at the end.
Yeah, you get one entire GCD of balance, which at this point, when you hit sleeve, just to speak to this, you ignore everything else except for arcanas at this point, minor arcanas at this point. So you play that lord, and you don't royal road that spire and then play the balance. You arcana that and get another lord, because one extra GCD, or I'll assume the better. I'll be very, very lenient and say 3 GCDs that everyone gets over that balance is not going to near equal 300 potency.
No way.
All right, that sounds right. Like balance needs quite a while to gain value, I think.
Yeah, it's a very strong cooldown for when you have it, but it's sort of the same scenario of when you are doing speedruns, and you are the best scenario for yourself is to get an extra usage of your buffs. The only time though that people start to delay buffs, like the reason, like Fan Train's a good example. Most people would not use their 2-minute cooldowns at 4 minutes, and they come back, they would hold on to them. They'll hold on to everything for their second pot, because you're normally not going to get another usage out of those 2-minute cooldowns. And so you use your 1 minute, you hold on to everything. It's the same thing with balance. If you get an extra balance at the end of the fight, it's not doing anything for you. You're not gaining any value out of it.
One question I guess I have is, I guess the right decision here was to use sleeve earlier, right? But
yes.
But at what point would you just been like, okay, I drew this balance and this thing's almost dead. Maybe I just throw the balance so that it has use, and then you just I don't know.
The scenario where you sleeve into AoE balance, and with that one free weave button press, you press the button, and there you go. You've done it. Like what they should have done is they do use this balance. They don't just sit on it. They play that single target balance on the Dragoon at the end, and then that's what they get the use out of it. But
where do you see that? They play it on the Dragoon?
No, that's what they should have done.
Okay.
That's what they should have done, and that's sort of like where it comes down to is the scenario where you just use the balance anyway. You can weave things for free now. If this was 4.2 to 4.3, you would ignore that balance, because the DP, unless you could weave it, unless you happen to have like combust, but even then you wouldn't want to use combust when you only get 4 ticks out of it. So in the current state of the game, you can freely weave this, and so you do. But you don't want to. You have to think about what the kind of value, 5% extra damage for 4 GCDs versus 300 potency. Even if you Arcana that spear, or that's God, I hate that they're so similar. You Arcana that spire, you get AoE balance. All right, I mean, you Arcana, you don't get AoE balance, and you get a lady. Then the extra 4 GCDs of that balance you would have gotten goes to waste, and you don't get a lord out of it. But if you favorably estimate, each Arcana to be about 150 potency, just based on 50% chance at 300, 50% chance at 0, you're still not hitting 150 potency more often than not in the final 4 GCs of the fight.
All right. I'm sure everyone agrees, right? Like sleep drop
Yeah.
should have been earlier.
Yeah, they delay it unnecessarily long. Now, maybe something else was happening and they needed to deal with it, but it's unfortunate.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything we need to reanalyze, or do you want to give maybe final summary or like a grade or something? I don't know. Anything anyone wants to go over first? Basically.
The main 3 things, the most important stuff to analyze is 1, a lot of issues came at the beginning of the fight with pre-pull balance, holding on to things for too long, and then not recognizing what sort of burst, because 90-second burst they definitely realize, but the spear at 38 seconds is not doing anything for them. So this is a good example of a mixture of both rookie mistakes. I'm saying rookie mistakes. I don't know if the person's actually a rookie or not, but pre-pull anything card-wise is a bad idea. And then some more veteran stuff, because knowing when and where your party is going to be bursting is important. Even if we assume they knew that they were going to be hitting harder at 130 than 2 and 1, you still need to have the wherewithal and the tempered aggression with how you're playing your cards. It's so very tempting to have a card and then just use it. Like, I have this card right here, especially in the beginning, like AoE balance, and then you sleeve and oh my God, I got another AoE balance, just play it right away. And then you hit this section of a minute where you're doing nothing. And then the extra DPS you gave was so minimal, it ends up being a loss over time. So you have to have the wherewithal with yourself to know, okay, I have a card. How do I best use this card in the scenario to give my team the most rated DPS? And it can be that you play that card right away because it's a balance, and the previous balance is about to wear out, and people are not going to be able to burst harder in 30 seconds. Like, that sometimes happens, and it's fine. But very, very often, back-to-back cards is not a good idea.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else that we just want to go over real quick for this one, or?
No, not really. That sums it up. Most of their problems happen from the start. They recover it slightly thanks to some good sleeve draw luck at 2 minutes, plus the downtime that allows them to prep. Yeah, that's kind of it, really, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Zerk, you have anything to say?
I think overall it was overall it looks quite solid. I think
Yeah.
there were a few decisions in there that we debated definitely for quite a while. There are a lot of very yes, what's the word? It's difficult to see, really. It's hard to tell at a glance really what the better option is. Astrologian has a lot of those where is this card worth redrawing? Would I be better off playing it? Should I save it? If I have a bard, or if I have a monk, but I don't have a bard, but I also have a machinist, is this arrow? Should I redraw it? And if it's also Thursday and I'm wearing red underwear and it's raining, is spear better?
Yeah, there's a lot of situations
Yeah.
with astrology that you get these sort of conflicting situation, and that mainly comes down to on the screen that arrow that happened. I guess it's a little above screen now, but the arrow that happens at 4 minutes before the burst section. Like I touched on, there is 2 levels of playing high roller with Astrologian. There is high roller, which is the sense of balance sledding completely, and everyone jumps off if you don't get it for the burst section. And then there is high roller of I am going to play for the higher return that I will probably get, or I should say will possibly get, versus the guaranteed value I have now, which I can assure of myself, which I will probably have weak follow-up because of it. And that sort of difficulty lends itself to, and at the end of the day, the actual raid differential, the raid DPS differential between playing this arrow completely perfectly versus making a minor mistake is probably so minimal you're losing maybe a second of boss kill time, if even. So it's a sort of advanced sort of thing that even if you don't have that sort of touch yet, that doesn't mean you're bad. That doesn't mean like everything is falling apart. You're still going to be contributing. And it's what's most important is simply that you understand like 3 main things. One, that cards have value in how they play into the future. What you do with your cards now affect what you do in the future. That's the first thing. The second thing is the cards that I play now will have an effect on what my party is currently doing now, and that's obvious. That's what they do. And 3, that the cards that I don't play now will have an effect into the future as well. So if I do nothing with the current card at hand, that's going to affect what I'm going to receive into the future.
All right. Well, final judgments. So if you were to grade this, like let's say you're a teacher and this is like someone's test for playing Astro, what would be the grade you would give them? Like like A to F, like A minus, B plus, all that stuff. All right, you go, Ari. You go, Ari.
I'd say B minus. And that's being lenient. That's assuming the player at the 90-second mark had the wherewithal and knowledge that their team would be bursting at the 90-second mark versus somewhere else. If they don't know that and they're just playing the card regardless, I'd give it a C.
Okay, Onion.
Yeah, you can't take the words out of my mouth on that. I believe that they knew about 90 seconds because the rest of their card timing seems sensible as well, by and large.
Yeah.
So I will give them the benefit of that doubt as well. I'll give them a B, I think.
Solid B. All right. That's pretty. You guys are pretty nice. Zerk, what do you think?
I almost want to say B plus, but I almost feel bad saying B plus, and maybe it should be an A minus, because really, aside from the initial, pre-pull card into really awkward jumble of just this Lovecraftian nightmare that is that first sleeve draw. Other than that, which I think I can forgive, because if I played my first card and then hit sleeve draw with an empty gauge and it gave me that mess, I would get flustered as well. But aside from that, I don't think that there were really any decisions that they made that were totally indefensible. Like there was, it seemed like there was a reasoning, like there was a logic, and that maybe this wasn't necessarily like super technically, mathematically the best average return decision if you sat in front of a spreadsheet for, hundreds of hours of your life and figured it all out. But it wasn't, it may not have been the best option, but it wasn't like just the totally wrong option.
Yeah.
Necessarily. Even that undraw, like this was 4.3, so I believe Minor Arcana still had a 5-second cooldown.
Yes, it did.
So even if they had played that lady and then waited the 5 seconds to Minor Arcana that bowl, they would have been causing their draw cooldown to drift 5 seconds in doing so. Which is, I mean, it depends whether that's relevant or not, but
I'd say
like there is
the
maybe at
scenarios.
least a defense for it.
Yeah, there's a defense for it. It's not the right move, but there's a defense for it.
I would
there's
agree.
For it. Yeah, I'd agree. I'd say if you turn your blinders to the first 50 seconds, and then pay attention afterward, benefit of the doubt on the 90-second card, which again still should have redrawn that spear, so there's still a little bit of deduction there. Everything else is outside of the undraw is for the most part correct in terms of card usage. Again, the double weaving with Malefic is a little don't do that. But other than that, I think, and at the end of the fight, the difference between playing that it's whatever, it's not a big deal. Like balance, AoE balance. I want to AoE balance. Oh, the boss is dead. Oh no, like it happens. It's fine.
Yeah.
All
They're
right.
victim of their own kill time there.
All right. Zerk, do we want to move on to your section then? The segment that you wanted to do?
Oh, my section.
Yeah,
that was my section.
It's basically your section. I mean,
Just any non-stop
I'm
puns.
flattered. Well, alrighty then.
remember the name of it?
Then how could I forget? The first of many terrible puns. The segment lovingly called "Don't Pull That Card on Me," where
Wonderful.
we're going to discuss. A lot of people say, such and such card is bad. This card is useless. When are you ever going to play this? Bowl, what is that for? We already kind of touched on that. Bowl is actually objectively really disgustingly overpowered for what it is. It's kind of in a similar boat with Sacred Soil. I think everybody sits, maybe a little bit off topic, but everybody's like, oh, Sacred Soil, I don't want to use Sacred Soil, it's gross, it's such a terrible skill. And I'm like, you realize, right, that if you just stop for a second and examine what Sacred Soil is a party-wide 10% incoming damage reduction that lasts 15 seconds on a 30-second cooldown.
Yeah.
That's obscene.
It literally makes or breaks your cooldown usage for like the main thing that holds White Mage and Astrologian back from being as strong a progression group for things like UCOB and Uwu. If you ignore the damage portion and everything, is purely that the lack of you can sit in your bubble, I guess, now, but
but it's not every 30 seconds.
No.
it's not
And
every
not in
30
such a large area, and ground place it across the arena.
Like if you do a cooldown spreadsheet rotation for how you handle Golden Bahamut, for example, without a scholar, it is infinitely more difficult. You are restricting yourself to certain jobs. It is physically impossible without tank LB to get through every single Mornifa if you do not have enough party-wide mitigation. Otherwise, like, you need a machinist, like you need a good bard. If like one or the other, it's really, really hard to get away with with triple melee. It's almost impossible to get away with triple melee. And I mean, granted, triple melee and UCOP has its own problems, but I mean, that's sort of the difficulty with the way jobs are set up, which leads with cards themselves. Cards are an RNG thing, and the problem of opportunity cost is always the counteract and the counterbalance to it. So what will kind of go into a nice little thought experiment moving into this section is something that I thought of the other day, is like, what are they going to do to Astrologian in terms of their cards and 5 point whatever? And what they could do is offer things where they remove the opportunity cost issue with doing things on a cooldown. Like you could have a 2-minute cooldown or even a 1-minute cooldown. That might be a little too much, where your next card play does not consume your Royal Road. And it's something you play. You use the buff. You use the buff. You get the buff for like 10 seconds, whatever. Sort of like dual cast, I guess, in a way, or acceleration is a better example, where the next time you use a card, you don't consume your Royal Road buff.
Oh my god, yes. Dark Arts Arcana.
Yeah, and
Let's
things
go.
like Yeah. Things like that. Things like that, where like when you
Wow.
start removing opportunity costs from things, you can start to realize exactly where these cards sit in relation to each other.
Okay, so
Yeah.
we're talking about Bull, right? Like that was the topic.
Yeah, a
Not
Bull
just
there.
Bolt. I suppose you were at that point.
Yeah, you were, and I mean, even Spire, though Spire, yeah, I mean, it's, I really want to make a case that every card has a use. It's just a matter of how frequently that use case actually comes up, where you're in a position where you are both capable of utilizing it and it is worth utilizing.
Yeah.
But Spire just makes it so goddamn hard.
Yeah.
Particularly now that everyone can take code.
And it's
so-
not even Spire's fault. It's
Yeah.
Tactician's fault.
It's
Thank
like
God.
it's the entire game's moving away from TP being a relevant resource.
Yeah, I
outside
don't know why it exists anymore, to be honest.
outside
It,
yeah
it has function in expert roulette, and that's kind of it, really.
Yeah,
It's one of those.
that's basically like they made. I understand why they did it, because the difficulty with managing TP was creating a disparity, quote unquote, which is a topic for its own scenario, I
The
guess.
whole
But
skill speed debacle as well.
yeah,
It's kind of like a tangent, but like you can see like a lot of like issues with some of the jobs just comes back to, well, it doesn't have that problem in dungeons. Like look at Dark Knight, White Mage.
Yeah.
Like they're really good in dungeons. That's why they don't really see a problem. I don't know. Weird.
Yeah, it's like Spire used to have a very, very niche scenario where you have a paladin or sometimes Dark Knight who has died, and it is not progression, so no one has goad. And Tactician is on cooldown because your range just cut aggro. Then, if you happen to find a Spire in that sequence, it's an okay card to use if you have no Royal Road already prepped. Yeah, all these factors lay on top, and now everyone has 10 roll actions, so everyone has goad now, and it doesn't matter anymore. Even Ewer, so it's sort of like Ewer and Spire are outdated technology. Ewer still has a purpose because MP is not as readily available resource, even though it is so very easy to come by now. It is not as readily available resource, and the two jobs that are most often played, Astrologian and Scholar, at this point, have MP issues enough that recovery with an Ewer is okay, and the fact that Ewer also does translate to DPS in ways like if you're red mage, red mages are super MP negative, and so if they die, if they have to raise too many times, Ewer can do something with faux wreck. It might accidentally give your paladin an extra GCD to spirit at one point that they couldn't otherwise if they have to disengage, but that's super niche and not really relevant.
AoE Uber seems kind of decent compared to some.
It's a decent recovery skill, which is actually, for the purpose of Ewer, AoE Ewer is more often than not what you want. If you're recovering, if you have to hard recover one person in particular, then single target Ewer has like a purpose. But most of the time, if you need recovery in the first place, it's because a couple people are a little bit MP negative at the moment. But even Ewer, with all this stuff coming up, is an outdated technology because now your DPS are no longer restricted in their DPS availability to you. Like MP turret and MP song cost your bard damage. Back in the day, your bard or your machine it cost them damage. Now it's free, so now that has like no reason at all. And now MP itself is so much more readily accessible. Like they need to find a way. Like these cards are AoE fodder recovery tools that aren't even good at being recovery tools. So they're basically just AoE fodder, and they need some. I say need in quotes. They probably won't get them because maybe Spire, but they probably won't get them because it's very low. I bet on SC's totem pole of relevant issues. I don't even know if it's on their radar. But the difficulty of those two skills just being completely outdated is very, very prevalent and relevant when you're doing anything and you have a clean run and you realize that you're really just looking at them for Royal Road, and that's it.
Yeah, I think it's they are just kind of at odds with the game, basically. Like, I think it's nice that Astrologian has utility. I think it would be very boring if all of Astrologian's utility, were strictly damage cards. If we
Yes.
didn't have any other form of utility like that resource recovery, I think it's nice thematically to be versatile in that way, especially for progression. Those, oh well, my co-healer died. Maybe I'll pull a Ewer. Otherwise, this run is over.
Yeah.
'Cause I
Yeah.
can't solo heal.
You do still get the occasional situation where you get a high value Ewer.
Oh,
And when
yeah,
you do,
of course.
it feels pretty amazing.
There's
So
always
it's
a
depressing
nice,
if
good
it
joke is that whenever we had like a God Kefka run or sometimes an Uwu Prod run, that things went a little south. And I happened to get in AoE Ewer, my party would audibly hear me just go like say something along the lines of like, fuck it. And then and then so usually it was our ninja who would just recognize the Ewer and just make some sort of comment on it. So and it has its purpose. It's an outdated purpose that is less of an outdated purpose than what Spire is.
Yeah.
But in a world or scenario where Royal Road, again, if Royal Road opportunity cost was no longer created an issue, or it was created less of an issue where you can readily access it without the need of your Spire, like for example, just use what I said earlier, like if you can ignore the usage of your next Royal Road and not consume it, but still use it, basically. So like you AoE bowl or something, but still have your AoE prepped for the next card and whatnot. That would just lower their value even more. Like when a card's value is tied not to playing it, but to how you discard it, that's sort of problematic.
Okay.
But I guess that leads on to the values of cards that we don't want to discard. And indeed are in home play. So I think
Yes.
Zerk wanted to talk about.
Those are the three worst ones in quotes. I'm including Bull, but
basically,
it's
they're cards that have uses in theory, and sometimes you might even get to use them.
Yeah, and when you do, because it's so rare, it feels amazing.
Yeah.
But,
You just have to look very hard.
Yeah.
And you have to, it's kind of a skill set to learn how to recognize the situations where where it is worth it to use a card. Like if you draw a Ewer and you don't have a Royal Road, or maybe you have a weird single target Royal Road left over from your last sleeve draw, like under normal circumstances you'd want to just Royal Road it so you have expanded for your next damage card. But you do also technically have the option of playing it. That isn't the worst thing.
no,
It's just you have to know when it's when you need to, basically. Just because someone is missing MP, obviously that doesn't mean that you need to give them this Ewer. They're probably fine.
Yeah, especially as an astrologian, I just being a mentor in the balance, I get a lot of questions from people sometimes where they're like, oh, like, what do I do for better for MP and whatnot? And like, or obviously the first answer is, are you pairing Celestial with Lucid? And like, yeah, and sometimes, usually they say no, but sometimes like, yeah, I am. I just really don't see. And eventually I get to the point where I look into the log, because there's no like initial troubleshooting, and then I see that they never go below 20% MP. I'm like, you're doing fine. Like, you're perfectly okay. Like, you have to get used to being low on mana. Like, Astrologian's just always going to sit near the end of their mana pool before they hit Lucid. It's just the way the job plays now. And that is sort of where, Ewer might have fake value, where you think like, oh, I'm low on mana, I need this Ewer, and you're sitting at 4k MP. You're okay, bro. Like, you're fine. Even if you're at 2k MP, completely all right. It's more than enough MP to get through most situations.
Yeah, you don't want to play it if all it's doing is preventing you from getting low.
Yeah, but in terms of cards having unexpected value, you can definitely see imagined cases for the role.
Oh yeah, I get lots of
countless scenarios for that.
Yeah, when things go wrong, if your tank eats a Volt stack and they're not gonna have enough cooldown, if things are just super, super, like, especially with it happens. To me, it seems like it happens even more in 012 than in
12 is my example as well.
yeah, where I'll be in a situation where it's like, if a tank eats, if someone, this is how it came up actually in our most recent clear run. Someone died during the hands phase because they went to the wrong side, died to the proximity damage, got raised, took the raise at the wrong time, and ended up getting clipped by the laser beams. So now they have a vuln stack moving into second hello world, and it's like that creates so many problems, especially if they have like the bads, that they get bad RNG rolled in for whatever strategy you use. They end up eating more damage than everyone else because some people just do that. And I happen to have an AoE bull, or I happen to have AoE card, and I found a bull, and I'm just 10% across the party is worth it right now. Like, just get through this. That's all that matters.
Or indeed, you can also imagine a scenario where if you got desperate enough, you could undraw your Royal Road and play that bowl single target.
Yeah, that
Yeah.
even is
Or
also
that
yeah.
person himself, and that might turn a wipe into a clear.
Yeah. If
Alright.
ever you,
Sorry. It's just there's like 3 other cards, and we're kind of going like really long time.
Okay.
So I don't know.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Well, I mean, yeah. Here we get into
It's
the
like-
more fun. Here we get into the more fun, where we have
Cards that we do want to
we'll
play.
spend a little time
Yeah.
at Arrow.
the ones that have a lot more intrigue and a lot more stuff to talk about: balance, arrow, and spear, because the value of these cards is tied to actually using them rather than how you royal road them, because you almost never want to road them.
Yeah.
Right.
so
We're talking about balance, arrow, spear, right?
Yeah, I think
Mhm.
perhaps the biggest things to talk about are probably arrow misconceptions at this point,
Yeah, I mean,
particularly arrows and machinists, arrows and summoners,
Yeah.
arrows and ninjas. Would be,
Yeah. the main, those 3 in particular. So to get this out of the way, I guess to start with, and just in case people aren't aware of it, for most scenarios and pretty much every scenario that is relevant, arrow is a better card than spear, in terms of everything that it does for your damage. Now, the 3 jobs in particular that have a lot of misconceptions about them is 1, summoner. They're a caster, so therefore they should get an arrow, right? I mean, you have to think about this for a second. Arrow is giving you more GCDs, and the GCD that the summoner is going to be spamming is 120 potency. And then you have to think about, is their pet getting any benefit from it? No. Most of the time, their pet is not going to be getting value because of the way things are tiered. They're not actually going to be getting extra auto attacks. And the auto attacks from the pet do not proc further ruin. So they're not getting any further ruin 4 procs from that. So you're not introducing extra access to that stronger damaging move.
Likewise, a fair percentage of the population are probably under the impression the arrow affects dots, and that is not the case either. So summoner doesn't benefit from that point of view either.
Yeah, it's a very summoner, and there are 2 jobs which dislike arrow more than spear, in terms of like disliking like negative reinforcement, and that would be summoner and machinist. Summoner gets so little value from arrow, it is literally better to play it on yourself than to give it to them. And machinist doesn't like arrow because the job is very clunkily designed into being very strict in where they need to have their GC set up. They won't lose damage from having an arrow if they're moderately adequate at playing their job. But even if they aren't, they can just click it off, I guess. But it's the sort of job where they are strict on where their heat gauge needs to be. If you don't really know a lot about machinists, that's okay. Just it's not that great on them.
Yeah, my machinist, I don't know if he's in chat still, but No Heart really hates arrow, a machinist. In fact, he hates Fey Wind. He'll probably click it off, like no joke.
Which is that's okay. I never frown upon a machinist clicking off arrow. I would say it is better to learn how to utilize arrow better for yourself, but I mean, it literally comes down to being able to manage an auto attack gain, and like that's so little potency that whatever, like yeah, it's fine. And
yeah, it's kind of a big headache for a really random situation that might never happen in that exact scenario again.
And machinists have so much to think about anyway because they're just so busy when they go into wildfire, and it's just it's fine. It's whatever. You AoE arrow is still good in party, even if you have a machinist and a summoner for some godforsaken reason. Arrow is probably still a very, very strong card for the party and usually better than Spear. But and the machinist can click it off, and the summoner, and they could take the free extra 120 potency every now and again, I guess. But
The other common misconception around Arrow is probably the one that you often see quoted, which is don't spread an arrow for people's openers. Like everyone will tell you that.
Yeah,
and
the only time that arrow is not good on an opener is explicitly speedrunning, because you are going for balance anyway.
Yep.
So if you're practicing speedrunning, there's no sense doing an AoE arrow and getting people confused on their rotations already. Even if they're smart, like my group, I think is very good and they're very smart and aware of things. I don't play arrow when we're doing speedrun practice on an opener, just because it's a pointless exercise. It might confuse people if they're tired or whatnot. So.
Yeah.
But it literally only speed runs. I'm not saying optimize clear runs. Optimize clear runs, it is still a good damage gain.
Yeah. Exactly that.
Yep, so arrows are good.
Arrows are
I
good.
we're talking about arrow. Someone in chat has just raised the point about arrow on ninja and increased gauge generation.
Arrow is a very good card on ninja. It is a better card on ninja than most people think it is.
Yes.
If I am not a ninja expert, but from what I have heard outside of I think certain burst scenarios and certain opener scenarios, ninjas like arrow quite a lot. And the extra Ninki that they can get from a single target arrow can actually contribute to a lot more damage than people are expecting.
Any other weird interactions with arrow on jobs?
Well, arrow and bard is a whole thing.
Arrow and bard is a complicated topic that we could sit here for 40 minutes talking about.
Definitely.
I'll give it the short end of the stick and say that arrow is a very good card, even though bards adore spear. If in the right scenarios, especially, arrow is also a very, very good card on bards at the right times. And that is about as specific as I want to get right now.
I think that's for the best, really. We'll leave that there.
Yeah.
Arrow and everyone else, there's no real point talking about, because I guess Arrow and Dragoon you could mention, but other than that, it's
Do you want to mention the weird thing of like arrow's good even if you don't gain a GCD, or you don't have to like count your GCD?
Oh god, yeah. Okay, I'll talk about this because I
put this very eloquently in Ast's discussion quite a while ago.
Yeah. If you wanna have that one, Zerk, you can have it.
I think he phrased it quite nicely.
Well, basically, it kind of comes down to most people will say, well, what if you don't gain an extra GCD from arrow? Then it didn't do anything, and maybe it threw people's rotations off and misaligned their buffs, and they lost teeny tiny amounts of potency and then didn't gain it back by getting that extra hit on the boss. So it was a loss, right? No. Because especially for expanded arrow, that might be a little more relevant for a single target arrow, but the situation where you play a single target arrow on someone and they don't get an extra hit, they have to be AFK. They literally have to be AFK for that to happen. But for when you're putting an attack speed buff on your entire party, you are increasing the rate at which the whole party is attacking by the same amount for the same amount of time. You are condensing all of the raid's damage into a smaller time frame. Even if you do 10 hits on the boss in 10 seconds compared to doing the same 10 hits on the boss in 9 seconds, obviously if you have done it in 9 seconds, you have killed the boss faster and you have done more damage per second. So you didn't gain an extra hit. The boss only has a finite amount of HP, but you could say actually that's the primary function of arrow, is not to actually get the group more damage or more hits overall, you're just moving them up sooner. Because again, the boss has a finite amount of health.
It's sort of like, if you think about it this way, if your party needs exactly 150 damage to kill the boss, and they will get exactly 150 damage in 10 seconds, versus if they get 150 damage in 9 seconds, and everyone has a 2-second GCD or whatever, and Arrow for some reason puts them down so that whatever math works out to that way, you are people, how do I word that? I'll word it better this way. The premise that people are assuming, which is the problem in the argument, is that when everyone does more damage, or like when everyone does the same amount of damage faster, the boss will still have the same amount of HP threshold at a point you hit your GCDs. It's like they're assuming that when they say like, oh, I'm not gaining any extra GCDs, they're assuming inherently that the boss's HP bar will be at the exact same spot at the exact same time with Arrow. And that's not the case. The boss will be incurring the damage that you would have done over that period of time faster. So if the boss has, 150 health and you get there in 10 GCDs, if you do those 10 GCDs in 10 seconds versus if you get those 10 GCDs in 9 seconds, you will kill the boss in 9 seconds as opposed to 10 seconds. Even though no one is doing extra damage, inherently, they're doing their damage faster. And so the boss will die faster.
The DPS is higher, so it's literally damage per second.
Yeah.
And there is one fewer second to divide by.
Yeah. The S part of the DPS, like if you have to remember that DPS is a ratio. And the way ratios work is that the amount of change to one part versus the other is worth exactly the same. The reason why haste is not as strong as flat damage increase in this game is off globals and dots, because they receive no benefit from haste for the most part, unless you include Imperial to be some sort of weird off global, but that's like its own thing.
But they're very specifically spell speed rather than skill speed, which is
yeah. So it's like it's this weird, difficult other scenario that's not really worth talking about. But the thing with Arrow that, like, at the end of the day, you need to remember is that haste inherently gives you to do the damage faster, and doing the same amount of damage faster means you gain to DPS.
Yep. And then you've also got the idea that quite a few people have told me over my years of playing this game that you want to play arrows when the boss is about to disappear, when there's about to be some downtime. Because you'll sneak an extra hit before it disappears. And therefore you can play it with 10 seconds left before downtime and you'll get an extra hit. And that's kind of the exact opposite of what you want to do. You want the full duration of that arrow. If you don't get the full duration of that arrow, you've got a decreased chance of getting your extra hit in. So
Right.
playing it just before downtime is actively the worst option.
Mhm.
And a lot of people believe the opposite, and I feel that's a misconception worth mentioning.
And to play devil's advocate and entertain the other side for a second, in the current environment of Savage, where phase pushes are not a thing anymore, the boss will push at the exact same time every single time. And a really good example of this is 011.
Yeah,
Early on, you only get you only get like 3 draw cycles before the boss jumps, effectively, about because you don't get your 2 minutes until level checker appears. And so Arrow can theoretically give you a net gain of 0 damage in very specific scenarios with certain people, because it happens so quickly and there is so little variance in how many cards and what cards will give you getting there, that it is a theoretical possible scenario where one AoE Arrow can give a specific one member of the team, based on their GCD timings and based on their current mechanical plan of attack for the fight, and based on how that gets affected by Fate Wind in tandem with Arrow, it is possible for them to gain minimal to no damage. But there's a lot of factors that play into that.
That scenario could happen. The likelihood of it actually happening are
basically 0. But to play devil's advocate, it is possible.
Yes.
Yeah.
That'd be
That's
true.
definitely the exception to the rule. But yeah,
but-
essentially,
Yeah, go on, Zach.
generally that's just how it works. Doing the damage faster means more damage per second. The only time that it actually does come down to whether or not you gained an extra hit within a finite amount of time is for strictly timed phases, like they were just talking about.
Yeah.
If you have exactly 2 minutes of uptime and you play one arrow and people don't fit in their next GCD before that strict 2 minutes happens and the boss disappears, then yeah, they didn't actually gain anything because you have not
Except
say
for like,
nobody in the party gained a GCD. Let's say that worst case scenario, everyone in the party was 0.1 seconds away from getting that final extra GCD before the boss went away. You didn't gain anything.
a lot-
But
Depends-
in
depends
things
what
like
you
time,
think about auto attacks, really.
yeah, you'd also have to assume that nobody gained any auto attacks,
Which
It's very unlikely.
which
auto attack and create. Yeah, so I mean, haste is something you can talk about for forever, and at the end, I think we're all more than willing to field questions with Arrow because based on my experience, I would not be surprised if a majority of the questions are asking about Arrow.
Yeah, that's always the case, really, isn't it? You sit
Yeah.
and ask questions every day.
It's a very sad topic that haste is such a complicated and interesting and fun part of the game, and it just loses out to all the just flat damage increase in the bunga. It's nonsense like hypercharge, trick attack, balance. And you can talk about this all day, but there's no question that they'll ever be stronger than balance. So
the moral of the story is that Arrow almost universally is a very solid DPS gain, and almost universally the people in your party are going to complain at you about it. And these are two things that are not going to change.
Yeah.
So get used to playing the Arrow because it's the correct choice, and get used to getting yelled at for it.
Yeah, I know that for the most part, my group just bullies me for Arrow because it's just a fun meme at this point, and they know it's good fun. But I still get yelled at for Arrow all the time, and I don't mind it. You just get used to it. It's not a big deal.
Have we talked about Spear yet, or
Not yet.
We have
Spear
not.
is
do you have a whole
Spear
topic
is-
on Spear? Okay.
Yeah, Spear is still a fun, interesting topic. Again, Bard being the problem child of all the DPS, Spear is a very fun and interesting and complicated topic on them as well. Beyond simply, it gives them a lot of DPS, and Zerk actually his Zerk sheet, as we'll call it, has a lot of good math describing exactly where and how their benefits from Spear come from. But other jobs, I think the first big job other than Bard that people think about with Spear is Monk. And Monk is an interesting topic with Spear because it's good, but it's not as good as I think people think it is. It still has a lot of synergy based on the way chakras work. But if you think about it, Boot Shine is an auto crit. It gets no benefit from an extra crit chance. And the extra 5, 10, 15, whatever kind of card you give them percent of Spear on them is probably not going to give them enough chakras to get an extra forbidden unless they have like a specific timing where they only get 3 or 4 chakras. So it's a very weird thing with Monk.
Yeah, so it's like a breakpoint kind of thing, right, in a way. But like it's kind of like, oh, if did you get like, I don't know, it kind of seems like similar to the Arrow question where it's like, oh, did I get an extra chakra or didn't I? But then there's also just like, well, monks meld a lot of crit, so crit's good on them, but then like a lot of other people meld a lot of crit, so
Yeah, it's sort of, you don't need a full extra 5 stacks from the Spear itself to get that extra forbidden chakra, of course, necessarily.
If
but
the monk
there's
would
not
have
really
ended,
any way to know.
Yeah, if the monk would have ended theoretically in an alternate timeline where you didn't get that spear, would have ended the fight at 4 chakras, and they didn't have extra time to build up chakra from downtime, or whatever. Like, just say it was towards the end of the fight, no downtime. They're not wasting their time charging chakras because there's no point while you have uptime. You probably gave them that extra chakra to give them an extra forbidden. So like that does happen. So you don't necessarily need to give them an extra 5. So that's
It's
why
just
Spear is still good on Monk.
It is a synergy that exists, and that's kind of about all you can really say about it.
Yeah.
And then
Uh,
in the topic of like single target spears, says single target balance, who do I play it on? Whoever's doing the most damage. End of story. Single target arrow, who do I play it on? 80-90% of the time, whoever's doing the most damage. End of story. I mean, that's sometimes the summoner or the machinist, and we've talked about that, but there's other factors into arrow. Spear is a little bit more interesting of a single target scenario because who is going to benefit from 5% crit more? I mean, usually the person doing more damage, but sometimes, you know, the way crits work and the way crit damage works, if you provide an extra 5% crit chance to, say, a red mage who's going to get 2 melee combos in the section of that versus a I don't know, let's say versus a ninja who's probably not going to be doing a lot of bursting in that time, but will do more overall DPS over the red mage for some reason. That shouldn't happen, but let's just assume it for the sake of a thought experiment. The spear on those 2 bursts is probably more impactful because critting, if you give them the extra chance to crit their combo finisher or their enchanted de joie or something like that, versus in giving the ninja an extra crit on like what Aeolian, it's like the differential of actual DPS can make a difference there.
Yeah, I suppose this is partly why Spear is actually really nice on classes like Black Mages, because critting some of their big attacks is giving them the extra crit chance is intrinsically of more value than giving the extra crit chance to someone like a ninja, as you say.
yeah.
Is it because Ninja doesn't have like? Is it because Ninja's more bursty and Black Mage is more like? just do a
Less
lot of-
that. I'm assuming that
yeah.
Ninja's not in their burst, like their extreme huge punch burst sequence. I mean, that was a bad example. That was a bad analogy
you're
for me to
looking
give
more at, like,
because
you're looking more at like big hits than anything else.
Yeah.
You want the chance to crit those. So for a class like Black Mage, where every hit is a pretty big hit, that getting increased crit chance on each of those hits is good.
hmm
Whereas a class that where every hit isn't a big hit, the increased crit chance is intrinsic is just logically worse.
Yeah, and it sort of, you know, files all the way back around to like, for the most part, the people who burst harder based on the way a game is set up also coincidentally do more DPS than the ones that kind of stabilize, because most jobs in this game are huge hit burst and then settle after that. And the 2 exceptions to that are Samurai and Black Mage. Those are climber jobs that reach up towards that gain in DPS over time and are very steady in the damage output, theoretically steady in the damage output they have. But that being said, Spear on those 2 jobs, even though they, again, it's sort of it becomes even more of a needless thought experiment when you think like those 2 jobs are 1 and 2 in terms of the DPS, personal DPS they provide in the game. So obviously, you know, Spear giving them more damage, they're doing more damage than everyone else. But hard hitting burst Spear is more valuable than more average consistent damage. A crit on a huge hitting move is more valuable than, you know, like getting a crit on a huge hitting move and then a not really that strong move is more valuable than like 2 or 3 on like, you know, whatever average GCDs, even if they're the stronger GCDs they provide.
The differences between them really are far overshadowed by pretty much every other gameplay factor, like namely how geared and how skilled the player in question is. And there tends to be a fairly large discrepancy, unless you're in a speed group, pretty much. But the only thing is the big sort of footnote for Spear is that bards really like Spear. Probably not as much. It's not as drastic of a difference, I think, as a lot of people think it is. Having spent way too long actually doing the math on it, they gain a little bit of extra flat potency out of their repertoire procs, assuming they're in Ballad or Wanderers.
Wanderers, yeah.
Yeah, I have to think about it, but
Was your mind wandering?
it was indeed. I want you to know that pun caused me physical pain, but they get some nice potency out of it that you can't say the same for most other jobs. So it's a nice bonus. But again, Bard is not going to be at least Bard should not be the single highest personal DPS in the party. So it would still most likely be better overall, actually, to play it on a job that is just doing more damage.
Really? So you would
by a
play
fair
it?
margin.
You would play it on like a black mage more than a bard then?
It depends on the differential, but assuming equal skill levels, probably, yeah. Unless it were at a time where I know the bard is going to be double snapshotting his buffs
Yeah, i.e.
already for other existing buffs like Litany and Chain.
Yeah.
Because then the bard gets a whole lot more mileage out of it.
Yeah.
Or if your bard is multi-dotting.
Yeah, you do not want the bard to be double snapshotting solely for the spear.
Yeah, it's just usually not worth it. Because in order to do so, there's a very good chance that they would be overriding dots that were buffed by more things, basically. So most circumstances for randomly playing a spear on a bard, probably just assume that they're only going to get 1 dot refresh on it.
Okay, so like if you were really good at, I guess if you were paying attention to the buffs, you would, I don't know, it kind of goes back to, you have a card that does damage during the burst window, you need to play the card, right? Because that's when Chain and Litany is going up, so so you would say like, oh, if I just need to throw the card away during, the boring phase, let's say, then you just throw it on whoever has the most sustained, basically like the black mage, samurai, whatever.
Probably, yeah. If you are in a situation where you're gonna play that single target spear, which happens, yeah. Maybe you double drew damage cards on consecutive draws, or a sleeve gave you something really weird.
That's definitely interesting. I don't think a lot of people agree with that, I feel like.
What it boils down to is that doing some napkin math just for a rough estimate of how much potency I expect a bard to deal between auto attacks, dots, average number of repertoire procs in mages or wanderers. Turns out that the average value of a single repertoire proc is actually quite close between the two. It's a little bit skewed in Ballad because of Pitch Perfect being weird and not having linear scaling, but the average potency value of a single repertoire proc is fairly similar. And the figure I arrived at was it should be somewhere close to about 6,000 potency in 30 seconds, assuming it is not under a 1 minute burst where they're going to be using Sidewinder, or they don't have Raging Strikes up or Barrage. Average number of refulgent arrows and all that. There's a lot of work. The spear on average, single target, is going to give them about what was it? It was a few hundred extra flat potency. So it's something. It's there. It is a little bit better than what it would be on someone else who's doing the same amount of potency. But
okay, so
not by a huge amount.
So people hugely overrate Spear on Bard then.
Maybe not hugely. I mean, the figure is still significant in terms of the margins that we typically are talking about in this game, which is margins that are so small that it's kind of a joke that people care about them. But it's not going to overshadow the fact that your black mage is doing 700 more DPS.
Okay. Well, it was very interesting. It definitely learned something there. Need to think about how I use my spears now.
Yeah, the biggest thing about it basically is just being familiar with your bard and communicating or knowing when those periods are where they are going to double snapshot for those other buffs.
Well, I'm sure you could figure it out. Like,
Yeah.
just like, oh, my scholar's chain is coming up in like 20 seconds. They're probably gonna do it there, or they should.
Yeah, that they're going to double on every chain and litany, most likely.
Okay. You want to
That
move
and-
on to? Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Other footnote is that Spear's value scales with everyone's crit stat. So by this point in the expansion, when everyone has a truly disgusting amount of crit, which scales their crit multiplier, which makes Spear much more effective, since it's just flat chance. Of course, the card is worth more when everyone's crit multiplier is 1.6 as opposed to 1.45. So
It's sort of like
that's
what we
actually about what
knew
it is right
as
about
we
now.
went. Yeah, it's sort of what we knew as we were getting further in, and he hasn't made an analysis graph of it for this tier, and I probably should make him. But Pimo Orangs, who does a lot of the math theory jerking for some of the healer stuff, had a very nice graph detailing the increase in damage provided by spear as people's crit stat grew over time. And we're at a point where the difference between arrow and spear is smaller than it's ever been in terms of how things go. The fight I had to, like the war path I had to foolishly try and make against spear for the first 2 tiers of this game or of this expansion has now come down to the point where I don't really think it's relevant enough to make a huge case for it, because I think spear and arrow are pretty close to each other now.
So close that it almost doesn't matter.
Yeah, it almost doesn't matter anymore. And Delta and AlphaScape, and not AlphaScape, Delta and SigmaScape, it was the case where arrow was noticeably a higher difference. And I still think for most scenarios, arrow still is a stronger card, but the difference is so small that you can kind of basically evaluate them to be the same in most scenarios.
Mm-hmm.
It's good to know. But that's going to change as soon as 5.0 drops, right? It's going to go right back down to the dumpster, right?
Most likely.
Yeah, they seem to be very intent on wanting to hard reset stats with each expansion, which I think is a good thing to prevent.
I think I do too. I think they do it quite well, to be honest.
Yeah, I think that's a good thing. And even though bards and scholars to a lesser extent, and pretty much everyone is going to cry from the lack of crit, it does increase the value of arrow. And as more and more jobs get introduced, there's more and more chance that there will be jobs that almost prefer arrow to spear in a lot of scenarios in single target. Even though that sort of is the case right now, I mean, jobs like Samurai and Black Mage love arrow, love it a lot. They also like crit a lot. Like, don't get me wrong, spear is also very good on them as well. But the amount of value of damage that they get. So the 3 speculated jobs that we'll be getting, which we can almost all but confirm based on the credibility of the source, but I'm still going to say it's just speculative. We have the Dancer Healer. We have the, Blue Mage melee, was it? Question mark. I'm not sure. Caster, maybe, or range.
Blue
I'm not sure.
Eureka exclusive.
Yeah. We'll figure out that. And then the Gunblade Tank. You can conceive a scenario where one of those 3 gets a lot of value. Now, based on how the devs seem to be very insistent on keeping healers low damage with very unfun rotations without any sort of intrinsic damage mechanic, Dancer probably will get value out of arrow, but it won't be like anything to write home about. But the other 2 are something interesting that we'll see.
Okay. You want to quickly talk about balance before we leave?
The sun gives damage.
Yeah, we like that one.
It is literally the yardstick with which we measure. It is the yardstick that we measure everything else against, and it's also the yardstick that we beat down everything else with
Yeah.
Like
Thankfully,
disobedient Catholic children.
the
There's
best.
a reason the Discord is called the balance and not the arrow.
Yes.
Balance is the thing we define the value of all other cards against. So,
Okay,
there's
so is
nothing
it?
much to say about it.
It's like
I guess something. Sorry, go ahead.
okay, the best change Square has ever done to Astrology in this entire expansion since it got released was nerfing balance down back to 10%, because it makes the topic of everything else so much more interesting and entertaining, and it takes away the requirement of balance letting ourselves out to the gods of the sun. Because now balance is still strong, but it's not so strong that you literally sacrifice everything to try and get it, because of just how strong that buff is, which was a good thing, and I am very happy that they nerfed it down.
Yes.
Yeah.
It just took away all of the choice, basically, all of the thought.
Yeah.
Something
When
Zerk.
something is 20%, it's just
Something that Zerk and I were talking about before was, I guess you could say like, oh, it's the most powerful card, so just play it whenever. But then some people have questions like, oh, well, when do I overwrite balance? Like, let's say it's like an AOE balance, and you have like a single target arrow or spear. When do you overwrite the balance if it's 5%?
The first and most obvious case that it will come out is if it is the final card you'll be playing in the fight before a major downtime section or before the fight is dead. And that is the case where the extra boon in a single target card of some other type on the right target will outvalue balance and be a good choice in that scenario. Things get more complicated when it's not that case, and it depends on what burst section you're in. If you're in your second pot, everyone's sitting so much harder, and after that is done, they're going to be on such a cooldown before their next hit that it can depend on what kind of cards you have set up at the time and making sure you're not sacrificing too much to do it.
Yeah. I suppose the most obvious example of when these scenarios come up is when you've played your expanded balance for a burst window, and you're a naked sleeve draw, and you get, say, a 150 potency spear, that kind of thing, and you instantly play that spear on, say, the bard for the burst.
Mhm.
I think that's probably the most obvious example of when you'd want to overwrite a single target balance. An AoE balance.
Yeah, AOE balance. Single target,
I
you
mean,
would probably never overwrite, right? It's like no way.
there's no real
You
reason as
try
well.
not to, but if
Yeah.
a single target is decidedly less damage than an AoE, that hopefully you never put yourself in this situation, because most of the time it's bad to play a card in a way that you're putting a single target card out before an AoE card goes out. Most of the time that's not a good idea.
Yeah, it would be the other way around.
Yeah, usually it's the other way around. But if you do end up in that scenario, AoE is just so much stronger a card, you just play it.
Yeah.
Mhm.
In terms of replacing AoE with single target, the other major factor is that if you are giving it to a job, if you AoE balance and then sleeve out to enhance balance on your opener, and you can play that enhanced balance, that's actually sometimes a good idea depending on the jobs you have at hand, because some jobs like Summoner and Dragoon, depending on what the Dragoon does with their life cycle, can hit hard after the initial balance will wear off initially, even with time dilation. And because 1 minute is weak enough that it's fine if you don't have your card set up necessarily for it. You want to have it, but it's weak enough that it's fine if you don't, and you will get 2 draw cycles before you get there. Sometimes it's a good idea just to replace, if you're hitting hard enough, an AoE with an enhanced. Extended's a different story, because if you replace with an extended, then you have to consider that will probably overlap into the second burst that you want people to be doing, and you want to have cards set up there anyway. So extended's a little bit different. You usually want to not play that single target and replace, but there has some situations that it's a good idea.
Yeah, extended is very difficult to work out when it is safe to play one, because you end up in the situation where you play an extended card, and okay, well, now your gauge is empty, and now your next draw, sleeve draw, is up, and you hit sleeve draw, you have an AoE balance, and your extended balance from before still has 30 or 45 seconds left
Yeah.
on it.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's
the
a real
problem-
chore to handle.
I guess the probably safest one to overwrite with an extended is the one in the opener. Because as Ari said, the
Mhm.
1 minute burst, it doesn't overly matter if you've got something for that. But giving, say, an extended balance to a summoner replaced in the opener would have value long into the 70-second kind of region.
Or
Fair.
the other one I can imagine is that if you sleeve and you have AoE with balance in your spread and a spear in your hand, you can't possibly place the spear into your spread. And so now you're either going to play the AoE spear instead of the balance, keep the balance for later, or you're going to play the AoE balance now
Yeah,
and
and
either MA or throw the spear on
play it
somebody,
on board. Yeah.
or redraw it and pray for your Aspire, I guess, for your card. But which is a difficult decision. But in this situation, if you were to overwrite that single target balance on somebody, or that AoE balance on somebody with a single target spear, it would be a reasonable gain to do so.
Okay.
And it depends again which burst section we're on. If we're on a major burst, you would rather balance and overwrite on the bard, probably the balance with the spear. If you're on 1 minute or even 2 minutes, honestly, with some comps 2 minutes isn't strong enough to value this in a way, but you would want to, sometimes just play the AoE spear and then hold the balance for the next minute sequence that you hit.
All right. Anything else to say about balance, or can we move on to questions?
I think we move on. Yeah.
Okay. All right. If people have questions in chat, doesn't necessarily have to be specifically Astro relevant. Like if you just want to ask like these people something, go ahead.
Yeah, just
but-
any sort of questions we'll field.
Oh god, this could go
I think I
badly.
saw one interesting question that I would like to answer from Fukutsu TV that asked that we didn't quite get to. Is there ever a scenario where using the spear is more beneficial than the balance, i.e., in combination with linear stratagem? I think we kind of covered it.
That's really funny you bring that up because I wrote that down because I was gonna mention that too.
Oh damn! Sorry, I stole your thunder.
It's okay.
sorry, it's fair. But that one was, I just remember that catching my eye. But if you're still here, Fukutsu, or whatever you want us to call you, the answer is no. Balance will always be better than spear, except on certain scenarios with a bard. And I think we kind of covered, in a way, the difference between spear with raid buffs like stratagem and litany up, and spear without those said buffs up. We did cover that, so if you remember that, you just hold that conversation in the back of your brain while we talk about this briefly. But most of the time, no, balance will be stronger than spear. AoE definitely always stronger than spear. Single target always, except for bard. And bard, there are certain scenarios that Zerg has that will specifically address.
Yeah, I actually don't think. I don't believe that even for Bard, even under ideal circumstances with a perfect double snapshot, I don't think single target spear beats single target balance, or AoE spear versus AoE balance. I just don't
What
think
about
it happens.
enhanced potency spear versus enhanced potency?
Yeah, if we're talking an enhanced or even extended, has some interesting implications. Because that spear does actually have some weird interactions with Army's Payan.
Yeah.
And some interesting snapshots happening there. And also guaranteed, or should be guaranteed, to cover their Sidewinder at least, and hopefully Raging Strikes and Barrage. So an extended spear on Bard is actually pretty solid.
Yeah.
But yeah, if you have a single target Royal Road for it, then Yes, but straight
No.
comparison on any even ground, like comparing the same Royal Road buffs on each. I don't believe it happens unless your bard is dotting multiple targets for an extended period of time.
I can't believe you linked that.
Actually, no, I don't know the answer to this. On 012 Forced, has anyone confirmed yet whether or not the dots tick on the one you cannot attack?
They do not. The dots are applied and they tick for 0.
Do they still get procs?
I'm pretty sure the answer is no. I remember my bard Yumiya actually used to double dot and then did some math or not math, but did some like research and found out the way he worded it is they don't tick, but they like still exist and they sit there for 0. So I think theoretically they might tick for 0 exclamation and crit, but I don't think that's worth it.
Because that would have led to some interesting spear maths around them.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure the answer is no, though. I'm pretty sure the
Okay.
answer is they don't. They might crit for 0 exclamation, and that
Yeah.
might actually not even give them a proc because maybe the way the game is coded in a weird way that whatever. But
well, for our purposes, I suppose that's a good thing. Or
0
Bard's-
exclamation.
Janky.
Or Bard's would very much be wanting the single target spears for 12.
yeah.
Have you guys all mentioned what conditioner you like?
I have. Garnier Ultimate Blends. I thoroughly recommend it.
Okay. Alright, do you have any more questions? You don't have to answer the awesome Uno question if you don't want to.
He knows my answer to that. I'm not. Ramson knows my answer to that, so I'm not entertaining that. I'm not entertaining that in a public stream. I believe you guys covered this. I dropped stream for a minute, logged in. Stacking AOE spear with other party-wide crit buffs better to stack for the most part. Usually, crit buffs are stacked already in tandem with other buffs, which is why they get stacked. And so you stacking your own spear on top of that is a better thing than to stagger.
So someone in chat has just said that that the dots do tick for full damage on the other boss.
I've heard it does some weird averaging thing.
I think FF Logs
displays it very weirdly.
Yeah, I think from if I remember correctly, and again, the Bard Masters of the World will probably be damn, he did get timed out briefly for that link. But I'll post it then. Actually, you might be able to post it, but yeah, that works. So as far as I'm aware, from what I've heard, the FF Logs, by the way, is not God. It makes many mistakes. Makes a lot of errors. Don't trust everything FF Logs tells you.
Especially with collective.
Especially with collection.
I feel like it used to work, but then they just kind of gave up on collective after a while.
If you believe collective, half the assets never heal ever.
Yep.
They stay grey no matter what they do.
But essentially the way FF Logs calculates dots and hots is really strange and unfortunate in this instance because they can't read how much damage the dots are doing. So I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, that they can tell how much damage everything else is doing, and they can read the target's hit points, and they know the potency of the debuffs that exist because they know the tooltips of the skills, and so they essentially they account for all of the damage that they can calculate for, that they can read from the memory, and then compare the hit points and see what's left over. The hit point change is then like, okay, this has to be from dots because this is the unaccounted damage, and then distribute it essentially according to what debuffs are present, which is very imprecise, has some weird implications with things like snapshotting and, in this instance, dots that tick for 0 damage but still exist on the boss. So you end up essentially stealing damage from people who have existing dots on the boss that are doing damage.
I think Lackey put it really nicely.
Mhm.
I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but
Yeah, basically it's FF Logs reads that, like, let's just say it reads that Stormbite did 2,000 damage here, and it reads that you have 2 Stormbite ticks. It's going to say both those Stormbite ticks did 1,000, even though realistically 1 did 2,000 and 1 did 0.
I see.
That's if I'm reading.
That
the
that appears to be what they're saying,
I'm pretty sure that's
which makes sense. It would be kind of dumb if you could apply dot before firewall and have it do full damage.
I mean, dumber things have happened.
True.
Like the fact that, dots still ticked on train while it was away.
Yeah, that was a thing, wasn't it?
Yeah, that was a thing because they wanted train to take damage from the chimney blowing up, so they were
Yeah.
lazy and they just left it vulnerable to take the damage.
does that mean something might happen similarly with Shinryu, maybe?
Yeah, it's definitely possible that that's happened before. I haven't looked into lugs though, so I have no reference. Especially because I don't really care about primals, so there's definitely a possibility some primals done it before. But
Definitely
Ooh,
something to look out for in the future. Yeah.
Fox has asked quite a nice question in chat. He said, revamp Astro cards like Bard Souls. We play a certain card every X amount of minutes, and it goes on cooldown. Yay or nay?
I think this
I
is
like
very I think this is very similar to what I was saying, is that one of the major issues with Astro cards and is still holding back cards from being useful and holding them back from adding interesting designs and rather what we could say overpowered designs to certain cards is the opportunity cost factor.
Yeah.
And if you have guaranteed value every single bit of time, that accomplishes 3 things. It accomplishes speedrunners being able to account for certain cooldowns guaranteed. It accounts for progression people to account for certain defensive utility guaranteed.
Yeah.
And it allows interesting coordination with, you have certain card, but I think RNG to a certain extent needs to be maintained into the kit. But I think that RNG is right now a little bit annoying. I think it has been dumbed down enough that good astrologians get guaranteed value most of the time. Like you can calculate a certain amount of the value we'll get pretty much all the time. It's kind of like crit. You'll be guaranteed a certain amount of crit over a period of fight. Now you'll get the god runs and then you'll get the shit runs, like that happens, but that's kind of where it is now. But there still is a level of RNG that's kind of annoying to work with, not just for, the top 1% speed running, but also for progression. Like if there could be some sort of guaranteed value out of finding a bull or an Eeyore or a Spire, or do some, I'm still thinking within the box of the way the cards are now, but do something where you have a defensive utility option and access that does not come with the opportunity cost of other things, or comes at the opportunity cost of the offensive, but you can always choose to take the offensive instead. That would be
nice. Yeah.
be interesting. Yeah.
I think the problem with being able to play every card on a certain cooldown would be the biggest problem. Would probably be the bowl, as we've discussed earlier. Having guaranteed 20% mitigation at X time in the fight would need rebalancing in some way. I think being able to play balance whenever at certain points in the fight would be fine. Same with any of the DPS cards, but bowl in particular, I think would be a tad broken to be able to play when you wanted at a certain time.
Levy mentioned that it, in a joking manner, I think, but if they did that, then rip White Mage, right? But I think it's actually the opposite. I think that the biggest problem with them balancing, well, okay, not the biggest problem with them balancing Astrologian is the just horrible dichotomy they have going on with the whole shields and regens thing, and just Scholar existing and Nocturnal Sect in general. It's awful. But aside from that,
I kind of agree, actually.
the next biggest thing
You say Rip White, yeah.
Yeah, the next biggest thing is the randomness of the cards, because they have to balance. I assume that they balance around averages. But
You'd hope.
I can say with relative certainty, I don't imagine that any of them have gone to the amount of, detailed probability math and, figuring out the exact mathematically optimal way to handle cards to make those balanced decisions. I don't think they fully understand exactly how much value you can actually get out of the cards if you understand essentially how to game the system in your favor, as well as if they're balancing to some kind of average, like just the nature of the job being random as far as meta and speed kills
Yeah,
and all of that
exactly.
goes. It is always going to be mandatory as long as there is RNG involved, because you can always get those lucky runs,
Yeah, you can always get more balances. You can always, yeah.
and nobody in speedruns cares about the average return. You care about the swings.
Yeah.
That's what's important. And Astrologian with these RNG cards presents a single element that represents such a drastic swing.
The thing
compared to
about
all of the other things like crit luck.
Astrologian's power that gets analyzed by the average community, or should be analyzed by the average community, is the T value showing exactly where their power is going to be. But the thing is that at the optimal highest level, it's the anomaly on the other end, or I should say on the extreme positive end, that people are looking for. And it's not necessarily just looking for, like back in Creator when people had literally nothing else to do and they're running this stuff like 30, 40, 50 times a day, like 4 or 5 times a week.
That's like what we're going to be doing soon.
Yeah, getting that exact run where they get balance for literally everything. Like that, we're not going to hit that level this tier probably, but like it's that sort of thing that people are going for, and that's not the measuring stick you rate the current form of Astrologian. And that's not how you measure it up against White Mage. And the balancing issues with Astrologian, White Mage, and Scholar, and the problem child is Nocturnal. Nocturnal Sect is where all the issues come back from. And I mean, it boils down to like Nocturnal Sect to be relevant needs to be stronger than Scholar in some way. And the only way it can physically possibly be stronger than Scholar in the current iteration is that it provides better shields. So you provide better shields. They did that for Delta. Nocturnal was a great progression job. Scholar was hard. People didn't take Scholar as much as Astrologian for Nocturnal. In addition, they add in UCOB with all these hard-hitting moves. In order to let Scholar stack up, they had to buff their shields. But now Scholar shields are strong enough that they can be competitive with Astrologian, even if they're slightly weaker. And now there's no problem there's no reason to take a Nocturnal at all. Now Scholar is OP. Again, now Scholar has all the power in the world they need. In order to match up against that sort of differentiation, they finally add in for Astrologian all the quality of life buffs that they've needed over time. And they can't do anything for White Mage other than maybe flat potency buffs, which they didn't do because it was so popular a job. But the White Mage is designed into a corner, and Nocturnal created an issue where it either is shoving Scholar out or Scholar gets a guaranteed place, and then you debate between White Mage and Astrologian. And the White Mage Astrologian dynamic is incredibly unhealthy. Even if they are homogenized enough, you can go from one to the other. It's not in a spot that's good for healer balance.
Yeah, it's the Heaven's Word range DPS arms race all over again. Like,
yeah, everyone's getting more and more, except White Mage is not included.
Well, White Mage is the caster.
Yeah, basically. You have White Mage is the Black Mage, and then Astrologian and Scholar are Machinist and Bard. Except it's not as disgusting a difference because Machinist and Bard went from support DPS to two of the strongest hitting jobs in the entire game at the end of it all. But I mean, in terms of where balance has gone, Scholar always being the strongest job in the current iteration is not only okay, that's how it should be. The job scales off of skill so much and involves enough, factors involved into it that's okay. That's how it should be in place. But the problem is then the White Mage Astrologian dynamic is that you either make White Mage, effectively just the power job, and then Astrologian the utility job, in which case the dynamic we had in Delta was, what we had. Or, Astrologian has some sort of niche and identity, and then White Mage gets designed into a corner where the only thing they provide isn't really enough. That when a tier like Alpha comes out, where White Mage does not have the tool, with White Mage's advantages and tools don't do anything. It creates this problem. I mean, Machinist is feeling it right now because Machinist's call to fame for Prague is Dismantle, and Refresh, and I mean, what else are you going to get? Like, I mean, people will take a Machinist because they want to play Machinist, but in terms of like what's the actual point of a Machinist, double range is even starting to fall out of contention. As a matter of fact, I think for the most part, outside of scenarios where you have to take double range just due to the players, most people prefer ranged caster or triple melee in the current state of the game.
Yeah, I mean, there are some like niche Prague things. Like I remember Tal was tweeting about how Rook blowing up or something was like carrying them through Prague or something. I don't know. Like killing the jail instantly and
there's
stuff.
Definitely purposes for them, but like the purposes that Astrologian has for Prague and has been strengthened and emphasized is still the point. But it's pushed White Mage out because we're one in a tier where White Mage's strengths aren't valued as much, and two, where Astrologian's strengths have been emphasized enough that people can finally recognize them and play them. So I think White Mage, I mean, going into 5.x, this is kind of a moot discussion. Hopefully the introduction of a fourth job can make it so they can actually balance two healers against each other versus two other healers against each other. And whatever way they want to do that, they can do it. Or they'll do nothing, make Dancer OP, and who knows, we'll have the same talk as we always have. But
Well, I think that turning cards into a reliable thing with maybe some kind of secondary RNG nature that isn't such a drastic swing in your raid DPS would allow Square to actually calculate for and control, the average and expected power levels of what an Astrologian can contribute to the point where they can actually quantify it and then balance it numerically against White Mage, so that White Mage is, potentially quite close. And that maybe even for speedruns and maybe some fights, it wouldn't be really that big of a difference between the two, even though Astrologian would have a slightly higher ceiling. White Mage could have a very competitive average.
yeah, in the current state,
It's just
White
uncontrollable
Mage
right now.
cannot have raid utility, and its personal damage cannot be high enough. It just pushes the other two out. And in 5.x, hopefully the introduction of another job can make it so they don't need to maintain, even if they want to maintain White Mage being raw power, pure healer job sort of thing, they don't want to give it a lot of utility, which I think would be foolish because I don't think there's anything intrinsic to the identity of a White Mage that says they can't provide stuff for the team. It's just the game design in the current state doesn't let it happen. I would hope that they would be able to introduce utility in some form, and then they can make healer jobs just balance off of each other in some way.
All right. So I don't think we have any more questions. So, any shout outs, guys, before we end? I think it's about time to finish the show. So, let's start with Zerk, since Zerk, you were the last intro. Zerk, do you have any shout outs?
Shout out to gonna shill the Balance Discord. I'm sure all of us are gonna shill the Balance Discord to all 23 of our viewers, all of whom are from the Balance Discord. Guys, if you haven't, check it out. It's got comfy emotes. Just don't go into Healer General. Those emotes are not comfy.
Oh, speaking of comfy, I forgot I brought this blanket here and I didn't wear it the whole time. I got the Blob Morning blanket, dude. I'm super comfy.
I'm disappointed.
All right, I'll just wear it during shoutouts.
Blob Morning.
Jesus, no.
I've
just seen that appear on screen. Okay.
Ian, you want to do a shout out?
If I give a shout out to anyone, it'll be Fox for inspiring me to be a better person.
Wrap around my head.
Yeah, and for loving me unconditionally. That's all.
Thank you, Fox. All right, Ari. Yeah, you got any shoutouts?
I guess outside of, the Balance Discord for, I don't want to get too sappy or whatnot, but probably the two best decisions I have made with, my Final Fantasy life, which, I mean, it sounds super like cheesy and weird and whatever. And like, I live outside of the game a lot these days and whatnot, but like, I mean, the two best decisions I've ever made was accepting the offer for a mentor and like committing to it, even when there was a lot of doubt and a lot of flame being thrown my way throughout the course of Heaven's Word, and just sticking with it. I'm really happy for the opportunity that was actually provided by Zerk here, and I'm happy for that. So thank you, Zerk. And then the other one was for my raid leader now for Unreal Zisa for accepting me onto the raid team. It's probably been the most fun I've ever had in video gaming in the last like 10 years, probably, is raiding with them, because just such a fun and casual group of people who are all good and go hard enough. And I learned to, be selfish for once in my life, because I'm not good at that.
Damn, that was pretty heartfelt, man.
As the astrologian moderator of the Balance at that time when that existed, I was honestly just so thrilled and relieved to finally have someone with a title on the server who knew what they were talking about. Because I didn't.
Yeah.
Oh my god, dude. I feel like you don't give yourself enough credit, Zerk.
Yeah, definitely not.
Zerk's an awesome guy. He works very hard for things most people don't really care to put the effort into. Been the moderator forever. Yeah, we all appreciate Zerk. I guess I'll do a quick shout out. I'm gonna shout out my raid group, specifically Claire, Harvey, my co-healer, Rebecca Serenade, my caster, because he's just a really good friend. And I want to shout out Juan in chat if he's there. He also goes by Fluid Aura. He's been my longest friend in Final Fantasy, and we've stuck by each other since our first raid group. And so I want to say thanks to him. So, yep. All right, any last thoughts, guys?
No.
All right. Getting a little too comfy here, so. All right. Well, thank you three for coming. I really appreciate it. Really good show. You guys said a lot of things. I learned a lot of things. But yeah, thanks everyone.
No, thank you.
Thank you for inviting us.
Yeah,
Thank you.
It was a lot of fun.
Thanks everyone in chat for watching. We are signing out right here. But if you want to catch these guys sometime, I've linked Ari's Twitch and Onion Face and Zerk you can find on Discord and The Balance. But, yep. Everyone have a good night. Catch you guys later.
Yeah. Have a good night, guys.